You've been standing still for years.
No. I've been building quietly. Choose the future you deserve.
I already did.
Ronald Sanchez was 39, a senior financial risk analyst in downtown Chicago. Most people believed he was the kind of man life quietly passed by. They assumed Madison had already outgrown the husband who drove a 7-year-old Honda Accord packed homemade lunches into the same worn leather bag and left the office every evening at exactly 5:30. What nobody knew was that Ronald had spent the last 6 years quietly building Falcon Ridge Capital into a private investment powerhouse. As Madison stepped into CEO Richard Whitmore's penthouse, Ronald signed a confidential acquisition order worth $842 million, and the final signature was still drying when his phone began to ring. If you're watching today, I'd love to know where you're joining from. Drop your country and your local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy slow burn stories filled with suspense, unexpected twists, and satisfying endings, be sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's story may be even more unforgettable. Morning always arrived before the alarm in the Sanchez household. At 5:45 a.m., Ronald Sanchez was already standing in the kitchen of their 2-story home in Naperville, Illinois. The neighborhood was quiet, except for sprinklers hissing across freshly cut lawns. Soft light filtered through the window above the sink, while a coffee maker hummed beside a neatly folded copy of the Wall Street Journal. He cracked 3 eggs into a skillet without looking. The movement had become automatic after 12 years. 2 slices of whole-grain toast, fresh coffee, turkey bacon, 1 container of sliced strawberries. Everything appeared in the same place every weekday. Not because Madison had asked, because Ronald believed routines protected relationships from becoming strangers. Upstairs, the bedroom door opened. Madison stepped into the hallway wearing a cream-colored silk robe while scrolling through emails on her phone. She barely glanced toward the kitchen before walking directly to the coffee machine. "Morning," Ronald said. "Morning." Her eyes never left the screen. He slid a mug toward her. "No sugar." "I know." It was a simple exchange, quiet, familiar, yet something invisible had changed over the past 6 months. She no longer smiled before speaking. She no longer asked about his day before talking about hers. Small things disappeared first. The easy conversations during breakfast, watching old movies on Friday nights, walking together around Centennial Beach after dinner. Now every silence seemed slightly longer than the last. Ronald noticed every one of them. He simply chose not to chase them. Madison glanced at her watch. "I'll be late tonight." Another executive dinner. Ronald nodded once. "Where?" "The Peninsula." "The board again?" "And Richard." She answered naturally, as though there was no difference between mentioning the board and mentioning the CEO by his first name. Ronald simply buttered another piece of toast. "What time?" "Don't wait up." She picked up her handbag, kissed the air somewhere near his cheek, instead of actually touching him, and walked toward the garage. 30 seconds later, her white BMW disappeared down the street. The kitchen became silent again. Ronald sat alone finishing breakfast without turning on the television. The silence didn't make him uncomfortable. False comfort did. Downtown Chicago was already crowded when Ronald parked inside the employee garage beneath Apex Dynamics headquarters. His Honda Accord occupied one of the oldest spaces on level 4. Beside it sat rows of new BMWs, Mercedes SUVs, Teslas, and luxury pickups belonging to executives. Nobody mocked Ronald directly. They simply assumed things. He must be terrible with money. He's been here almost 10 years. Still driving that thing. I guess ambition isn't for everyone. He heard comments occasionally, never responded. The Accord had fewer than 80,000 miles. The engine ran perfectly. Replacing it would have been financially irrational. Ronald preferred rational decisions. Inside the building, the lobby buzzed with conversation. Large digital screens displayed Apex Dynamics' stock price. Employees clustered around espresso machines discussing quarterly forecasts. Marketing teams hurried toward conference rooms. Someone laughed loudly after spotting Madison entering with Richard Whitmore. The CEO carried himself exactly as magazine covers suggested he should. Perfect navy suit, perfect smile, perfect posture. He greeted receptionists by name, shook hands with junior employees, remembered birthdays. Investors adored him. The financial press called him one of America's most visionary manufacturing executives. Madison walked beside him carrying a leather portfolio. She laughed at something Richard said. For just a moment, she placed one hand lightly on his arm. It lasted barely 2 seconds. Most people would never notice. Ronald did. He didn't slow down, didn't stare, didn't interrupt. He simply pressed the elevator button. When the doors closed, Richard and Madison remained in the lobby, still talking. Ronald's reflection stared back from the stainless steel doors. Calm, controlled, unreadable. His office overlooked the Chicago River from the 23rd floor. Unlike marketing, the risk analysis department rarely entertained visitors. Spread across Ronald's desk were financial models, debt schedules, supplier contracts, and cash flow projections. He ignored company gossip. Numbers lied less than people. By mid-morning, he had already reviewed 3 manufacturing subsidiaries. Everything appeared healthy. Except one division, Apex Industrial Components. Inventory values seemed unusually high. Not impossible, just optimistic. Ronald opened last quarter's filings, then the previous year's, then another set dating back 4 years. His expression never changed. He highlighted one line, deferred maintenance reserves. The number had fallen steadily despite aging equipment. That shouldn't happen, not naturally. He made a note. Nothing more. No accusations. Just another piece waiting to fit somewhere later. Lunch arrived exactly at noon. Most employees ordered salads or sandwiches through delivery apps. Ronald opened his lunchbox. Grilled chicken, brown rice, roasted vegetables, homemade. Across the cafeteria, several co-workers watched Madison entering with Richard and 3 vice presidents. They occupied the executive dining area separated by glass partitions. Someone smiled. They're practically inseparable. Another shrugged. That's how promotions happen. A third laughed. Poor Ronald. The comments weren't malicious, just careless. Ronald never looked toward the executive section. Instead, he finished eating in 15 quiet minutes before returning upstairs. People mistook composure for ignorance. They assumed silence meant blindness. It rarely did. That evening, the office slowly emptied. At precisely 5:30 p.m., Ronald shut down his computer. The same routine, every day. Several co-workers exchanged amused smiles. Clockwork. Never works late. No wonder he never gets ahead. Ronald carried his leather bag toward the elevator. None of them noticed the encrypted laptop remaining inside his locked briefcase. None of them knew his real work began after dinner. Back home, the house felt larger than usual. He changed into jeans and a gray sweater before replacing a loose cabinet hinge Madison had mentioned weeks earlier. She probably wouldn't notice. He fixed it anyway. Afterward, he vacuumed the living room, folded laundry, prepared tomorrow's breakfast ingredients. By 7:30, everything was finished. The house looked exactly as it always had, only quieter. At 8:14 p.m., headlights swept across the driveway. Madison entered carrying expensive gift bags bearing the logo of a luxury boutique on Michigan Avenue. They gave everyone gifts after dinner, she said casually. Ronald glanced toward the bags. Designer perfume, leather accessories, nothing inexpensive. Successful meeting? Very. She sounded energized, more alive than she had all week. Richard had apparently announced a major expansion strategy. Executives applauded. Champagne followed. She described the evening enthusiastically. The rooftop views, the investors, the speeches. Richard's vision for transforming Apex into a global powerhouse. Ronald listened without interrupting. Not once did Madison ask how his own day had gone. When she finally stopped speaking, she looked toward him. "You could have come?" "I wasn't invited." "You don't really like those events anyway." "No," he smiled politely. "I don't." She disappeared upstairs carrying the gift bags. Ronald remained alone in the family room. 10 minutes later, he unlocked the encrypted laptop hidden inside his briefcase. A secure login screen appeared. Falcon Ridge Capital. Portfolio dashboard. Several holdings updated automatically. Market indices rolled across the monitor. Then another window opened. Apex Dynamics. Ownership position 4.81%. Acquisition progress on schedule. Benjamin Hayes had left a single encrypted message. 3 institutional sellers may exit before quarter end. Call when available. Ronald read it once, closed the message, then reopened the company's internal financial reports beside Falcon Ridge's acquisition model. 2 entirely different worlds. One employer, one future owner. Outside rain began tapping softly against the windows. Upstairs, Madison laughed while talking on the phone. Ronald couldn't hear every word. Only one name. Richard. He lowered the volume on the laptop and returned to the balance sheets. The numbers continued telling their story. And for the first time, Ronald became certain the company wasn't merely undervalued. It was hiding something far more dangerous. He clicked open one final document, a maintenance reserve report that someone had quietly amended 3 days earlier. The revised figures made no financial sense. He stared at the screen for several long seconds. Then he reached for a notebook and wrote a single sentence. Someone expects no one to look this closely. Friday evenings at Apex Dynamics rarely belonged to ordinary employees. The executive floor transformed into something closer to a private country club than a corporate office. Caterers wheeled in polished silver trays. Bartenders arranged crystal glasses beside panoramic windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Jazz drifted softly through hidden ceiling speakers, while investors, consultants, and board members exchanged practiced smiles. Officially, it was called the Quarterly Leadership Reception. Unofficially, it was where influence changed hands. Ronald almost never attended. This time he accepted the invitation, not because he enjoyed networking, because observation had become part of his investment strategy. He arrived exactly at 6. Dark gray suit, white shirt, plain navy tie, no expensive watch, no designer shoes. He looked like another mid-level employee who had wandered into the wrong room. Several executives nodded politely before turning back toward conversations they considered more valuable. Perfect. Remaining invisible had always been easier than becoming important. Across the ballroom, Richard Whitmore stood beneath a massive digital display showing Apex Dynamics' newest manufacturing expansion. He moved effortlessly through the crowd. One moment speaking with institutional investors, the next laughing beside city officials. Then greeting members of the board as though each friendship had existed for decades. His confidence appeared effortless. People naturally leaned closer when he spoke. Madison remained only a few steps behind him. She carried a tablet instead of a wine glass. Whenever Richard introduced someone important, she already knew their background. She anticipated questions before they were asked. She smiled at exactly the right moments. Watching them together, almost anyone would assume they had worked side by side for years. Ronald noticed something else. Richard never carried anything. Someone always carried it for him. Someone always opened the next conversation. Someone always made him appear larger than life. That role increasingly belonged to Madison. Ronald accepted a sparkling water from a passing waiter. He didn't join any conversation. Instead, he slowly walked the perimeter of the ballroom. Every few minutes, he paused beside display boards describing Apex's newest investments. He wasn't reading the promotional material. He was reading the names. Construction contractors, equipment suppliers, debt partners, insurance providers. Every company connected another piece inside his mind. He quietly memorized them. Near one corner of the room stood a woman in her early 40s, wearing a charcoal blazer over a navy dress. She wasn't speaking to investors. She wasn't chasing executives. Instead, she watched people. The habit caught Ronald's attention because it mirrored his own. Her press badge identified her. Emily Parker, Chicago Business Review. She had built a reputation by exposing accounting scandals that larger newspapers often ignored. Emily noticed Ronald studying supplier names instead of greeting executives. Interesting. Most guests stared at Richard. Ronald stared at legal disclosures printed in 6-point font beneath promotional banners. She approached naturally. Not exactly exciting reading. Ronald looked up. It depends. She smiled. You're the first person tonight who spent more time reading footnotes than drinking champagne. I prefer footnotes. They're usually more honest. They're usually less rehearsed. Emily laughed quietly. I'll remember that. She extended a hand. Emily Parker? Ronald Sanchez. No title. Risk analysis. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. So you're one of the people who actually reads quarterly reports? Sometimes. She looked toward Richard across the room. What do you think of your CEO? Ronald took a careful sip of sparkling water before answering. I think investors like certainty. That's not what I asked. No. It wasn't. He smiled politely. But it's still true. Emily studied him another moment. Most executives enjoyed giving opinions. Ronald offered observations instead. There was a difference. A presentation began. Richard stepped onto a raised platform as applause filled the ballroom. Behind him, giant screens displayed impressive numbers: revenue growth, market expansion, record profitability, new acquisitions. Employees watched proudly. Investors nodded with satisfaction. Richard delivered each sentence with polished confidence. Our greatest strength isn't technology. He paused. It's trust. More applause. Ronald remained still. His attention drifted toward one slide showing long-term infrastructure investments. One number bothered him, not because it looked too small, because it matched exactly the revised maintenance reserve report he had reviewed the previous night. Identical. Down to the last dollar. The presentation wasn't introducing new information. It was reinforcing altered information. That meant multiple departments had already accepted the revised figures. Interesting. Much more interesting than Richard's speech. Later, guests spread across smaller conversation groups. Ronald quietly excused himself and walked toward the investor relations corridor. Few people noticed. One hallway connected to the executive library. Corporate reports lined floor-to-ceiling shelves. Annual reports dating back nearly 20 years. SEC filings, proxy statements, merger documentation. The room remained empty. Ronald slipped on thin cotton gloves provided beside archival materials. He removed 3 annual reports, one from 4 years earlier, another from 6 years earlier, one from 8. Then he photographed only specific pages using his phone, not entire reports, just sections regarding capital expenditures and equipment depreciation. Patterns mattered. Snapshots did not. A quiet voice interrupted him. I thought I might find you in here. Emily Parker leaned against the doorway. No interviews happening, Ronald asked. They're all asking Richard the same questions. And you? I'm interested in the person reading old filings. She glanced toward the documents. What are you looking for? Ronald carefully returned one report to the shelf. Consistency. Finding any? Not yet. Emily folded her arms. I've covered enough corporate fraud cases to recognize that answer. Ronald looked at her. Fraud is a legal conclusion. So, what do you call it? He considered the question. A reason to keep reading. Emily smiled again. You know something. I know numbers. They usually lead somewhere. They always do. She reached into her bag. If you ever decide you need someone who knows how to ask uncomfortable questions. She handed him a business card. Call me. Ronald accepted it. No promises, no refusal. Simply a nod. By 9 o'clock, the reception had become louder. Wine replaced business. Laughter replaced presentations. Richard stood near the windows speaking privately with 2 board members. Madison remained beside him. One of the directors clapped Richard warmly on the shoulder. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. Ronald watched from across the room. Not the conversation. Their body language. Richard spoke. The directors listened. Madison watched the directors instead of Richard. She was measuring reactions, learning influence, perhaps without even realizing it. Ronald felt neither jealousy nor anger, only distance. The woman laughing across the ballroom barely resembled the one who used to celebrate takeout pizza on Friday nights because neither of them wanted to cook. Success had changed many things, or perhaps it had simply revealed them. At 9:47 p.m., Ronald quietly left the reception. No one stopped him. No one asked where he was going. His Honda Accord rolled out of the underground garage, while luxury sedans remained lined outside the hotel entrance. 25 minutes later, he entered his home office. The encrypted laptop came alive. Falcon Ridge Capital. Portfolio Analytics. He uploaded photographs taken inside the executive library. Artificial intelligence compared historical reports line by line. Within seconds, several sections highlighted in amber. Modified depreciation assumptions, altered reserve calculations, reclassified maintenance expenses. Each change alone appeared reasonable. Together, they formed something entirely different. Ronald leaned back. Then another alert appeared. Historical SEC archive comparison complete. One line flashed red. Executive compensation adjustment. Filed 3 years ago. Quietly amended 16 months later. No public explanation. Ronald opened the amended filing. His eyes stopped moving. The compensation revision connected directly to one of Richard Whitmore's private incentive agreements. Not illegal by itself, but strangely timed. Very strangely timed. He picked up his phone. Only one person would understand the significance immediately. Benjamin Hayes answered after the first ring. You found something. Ronald looked once more at the highlighted document. His voice remained calm. I need every SEC filing Richard Whitmore has signed since becoming CEO. Benjamin didn't ask why. I'll have them before sunrise. The call ended. Ronald stared through the office window into the dark Illinois night. The company wasn't simply hiding weak financial decisions. Someone had been quietly rewriting its history. And history, Ronald knew better than anyone, always left a paper trail. Benjamin Hayes never asked unnecessary questions. That was one of the reasons Ronald Sanchez had trusted him for nearly 15 years. They had met long before Falcon Ridge Capital existed, when both were junior analysts sharing a cramped office above a regional investment bank on LaSalle Street. While other young professionals chased bonuses with risky trades, Ronald and Benjamin spent weekends studying bankrupt manufacturers, forgotten industrial firms, and annual reports dating back decades. They had learned the same lesson early. The market rewarded excitement. Real wealth rewarded patience. Saturday morning arrived with gray clouds hanging over downtown Chicago. Ronald drove his familiar Honda Accord toward an anonymous 6-story office building in the West Loop. No company logo appeared outside. No directory listed Falcon Ridge Capital. The investment firm officially occupied only 2 floors under the name Ridge Strategic Holdings, LLC. Privacy had always been intentional. Inside the reception area, modern furniture replaced unnecessary luxury. No marble sculptures. No expensive artwork. No oversized corporate slogans. Money spent impressing visitors was money unavailable for investments. Benjamin looked up from a conference table as Ronald entered. You were right. He slid a thick binder across the polished wood surface. I had our legal team collect every SEC filing Richard Whitmore has signed since becoming CEO. Ronald removed his jacket before sitting. Anything obvious? Benjamin smiled. If it were obvious, everyone else would have found it. He opened the binder. Color-coded tabs divided the documents. Executive compensation, debt financing, subsidiary transfers, proxy statements, insider transactions, regulatory amendments. Ronald appreciated organization. It shortened the distance between questions and answers. For nearly 3 hours, neither man spoke much. Pages turned, numbers were highlighted, dates were compared, footnotes matched against previous filings. Occasionally, Benjamin circled something. Ronald simply made notes in a black leather notebook. At 10:43 a.m., Benjamin stopped. Look at this. He rotated one document. 3 years earlier, Apex Dynamics had refinanced nearly $640 million in long-term debt. Nothing unusual. Manufacturing companies refinanced debt regularly. But one covenant required maintaining minimum equipment maintenance reserves. Ronald opened another filing, then another. His eyes narrowed slightly. The reserve keeps decreasing. Benjamin nodded. But the debt keeps increasing. Neither statement alone proved anything. Together they raised an uncomfortable question. If maintenance reserves were shrinking while production capacity expanded, something else had to absorb the cost. Equipment did not become newer by itself. Factories did not repair themselves. Someone had moved expenses somewhere else. The question was where? Benjamin leaned back. You think Richard ordered it? Ronald remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he answered. I don't know. Benjamin waited. Ronald continued. I know the filings changed. I know executive compensation increased after the revisions. I know maintenance expenses disappeared. But assumptions aren't evidence. Benjamin smiled. Still the same Ronald. The facts matter. They always did. They always will. Many investors built cases around suspicion. Ronald built them around documentation. It took longer. It almost always lasted longer. Benjamin opened another folder. This is the acquisition schedule. Several charts covered the table. Ownership percentages, institutional shareholders, voting rights, board composition, convertible debt, option grants. Ronald examined every page. Falcon Ridge Capital had quietly acquired shares through multiple investment entities over 6 years, never too quickly, never attracting unnecessary attention. Every purchase looked ordinary. Small, patient, methodical. Benjamin pointed toward one chart. We currently control just under 5%. Ronald nodded. I know. Once we cross 5, disclosure requirements change. I know. Everyone will start asking who Falcon Ridge really is. They'll ask? Benjamin looked directly at him. You still want to remain anonymous until then? Yes. No interviews. No. No rumors. No? Benjamin laughed softly. You really hate attention. I hate distractions. Those were two entirely different things. At noon, another man entered the conference room. Tall, silver-haired, dark blue suit, thin leather briefcase. Michael Donovan, one of Chicago's most respected corporate attorneys. He had represented Fortune 500 mergers, hostile takeovers, shareholder litigation, and governance disputes for nearly 3 decades. He shook Ronald's hand. Good to see you again. You too. Michael placed several legal folders onto the table. I've reviewed the acquisition structure. Benjamin asked first. Problems? None. Michael adjusted his glasses. But once you become visible, Richard Whitmore's attorneys will attack every procedural step. They'll challenge disclosure timing. They'll question beneficial ownership. They'll review every affiliated entity. Ronald nodded. They should. Michael looked slightly surprised. You want them to? I expect them to. If we followed every regulation correctly, scrutiny becomes an advantage. Michael smiled. I wish more clients understood that. Ronald wasn't preparing for revenge. He was preparing for examination. There was an important difference. For the next hour, they walked through every legal requirement. Schedule 13D disclosures, voting thresholds, board notification procedures, federal securities regulations, antitrust review, shareholder communication. Michael paused beside one document. If this becomes contested, he tapped the page. The court won't care how anyone feels. Ronald answered immediately. Good. It'll only care about evidence. Exactly. Michael closed the folder. Then keep collecting it. After lunch, Ronald remained alone in the conference room. Benjamin stepped outside to take a call. Michael left for another meeting. Silence settled over the building. Ronald opened Falcon Ridge's original incorporation documents. The first capital contribution had been modest. Just over $200,000. Nearly 6 years earlier, friends had questioned his decision. Why invest in forgotten industrial companies? Why buy businesses nobody wanted? Why avoid technology startups making headlines? Ronald remembered every conversation. He also remembered every balance sheet. Factories survived economic cycles. Infrastructure remained valuable. Manufacturing recovered, eventually. Patient capital always found opportunities where impatient investors saw only problems. Falcon Ridge had grown one disciplined decision at a time. No miracles, no lottery moments, no overnight success. Just thousands of quiet choices made correctly. His phone vibrated. Madison? He answered. Hi. Are you working again? Yes. You know it's Saturday. I do. A brief silence followed. I'm having lunch with Richard and several investors. I figured. You don't mind. Ronald looked toward the acquisition schedule spread across the conference table. No. You sound busy. I am. Okay. She hesitated. I'll probably be late. I understand. The call ended after less than 40 seconds. Neither said, I love you. Neither seemed to notice. Ronald placed the phone face down, then returned to the spreadsheets. Late that afternoon, Benjamin returned carrying fresh market reports. Interesting development. Ronald looked up. 3 pension funds are considering reducing their apex positions. Confirmed, Benjamin handed over the reports. Not yet. But likely. Ronald studied the names. Each fund collectively owned almost 4% of the company. Enough to matter. Not enough to trigger headlines. If they sell, Benjamin finished the sentence. We buy. Ronald nodded once. But slowly. Benjamin laughed. Of course. You'd probably negotiate the speed of watching paint dry. Ronald smiled faintly. Fast money gets noticed. Quiet money gets control. Benjamin couldn't argue. Everything Falcon Ridge had accomplished came from refusing to rush. Before leaving, Michael Donovan returned with one final recommendation. One more thing. Both men looked toward him. I want an independent forensic accounting firm retained now. Benjamin frowned. Before we own the company, Michael nodded. If something is wrong inside Apex, we need experts ready before the board ever asks. Ronald considered the suggestion. It fit perfectly with his philosophy. Preparation before confrontation. Evidence before accusation. He reached for his pen. Do it. Michael made a note. I'll retain Harrison and Cole Forensic Accounting under attorney-client privilege. No one outside this room knows. No one will. Another quiet decision. Another piece moving into place months before anyone else realized a game was even being played. As evening settled over Chicago, Ronald drove home beneath darkening skies. Traffic moved slowly along Interstate 290. Most drivers hurried toward dinner reservations, sporting events, or weekends with family. Ronald's thoughts stayed fixed on numbers, maintenance reserves, debt covenants, executive compensation, ownership percentages. Individually, each fact remained harmless. Together, they were beginning to form a pattern. Not proof. Not yet. But patterns had a habit of leading investigators toward truths hidden beneath polished presentations. He pulled into his driveway just after 7. Madison's BMW wasn't there. The house stood quiet beneath the porch light. Ronald unlocked the front door, set down his briefcase, and paused when he noticed an elegant black gift box resting on the kitchen island. A handwritten note sat on top. For Madison. Richard Ronald didn't touch the box. He simply looked at it for several seconds before walking past it into his home office. Some men would have opened the gift. Others would have called their wives in anger. Ronald did neither. Instead, he opened his notebook and added another line beneath yesterday's entry. The distractions are becoming easier to see. Then he turned to the next page and began outlining Falconridge's largest acquisition strategy yet. The divorce began on a Tuesday. Not in a courtroom, not with raised voices, not even with a dramatic confession. It began with a plain, white envelope resting on Ronald Sanchez's keyboard when he arrived at work. No return address, no handwritten note, only the logo of a respected family law firm in downtown Chicago. Hamilton Pierce and Lowe. Ronald looked at the envelope for several seconds before opening it. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Filed on behalf of Madison Sanchez. He read every page once. Then he placed the documents back inside the envelope exactly as he had found them. Across the office, phones rang. Employees hurried toward morning meetings. Someone laughed near the elevators. Nothing around him had changed. Only the direction of his life. He did not call Madison. He did not leave work. He did not crumple the papers in frustration. Instead, he opened his calendar. At 10:30 a.m., he had a quarterly risk committee meeting. At noon, a conference call with a manufacturing subsidiary in Ohio. At 3:00 p.m., an internal compliance review. He attended every meeting, took notes, asked questions, finished each responsibility exactly as scheduled. Only after leaving the office at 5:30 did he dial a number saved under one simple name. Michael. The attorney answered immediately. I was expecting your call. Ronald glanced at the envelope resting on the passenger seat of his Honda. It happened. Michael's voice remained calm. When? This morning. Come by the office. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Michael Donovan occupied the corner floor of a historic building overlooking the Chicago River. His office reflected decades of corporate law. Shelves filled with legal volumes, framed merger announcements, old photographs beside former judges. Nothing flashy. Everything earned. Michael finished reading the petition before looking up. As expected. Ronald nodded. No surprises? Actually, Michael tapped one paragraph. Ooh, there is one. Ronald waited. She's requesting an accelerated property settlement. Why? Michael folded his hands. That usually means someone believes the financial picture is already simple. Ronald understood immediately. Madison believed she already knew what he owned. The house, his retirement account, savings, his Honda, personal belongings, ordinary assets. Nothing extraordinary. She had never asked detailed questions about Falconridge. Years earlier, Ronald had explained that he was making long-term investments through private partnerships. She had smiled politely, then changed the subject. At the time, she simply wasn't interested. Now that lack of curiosity had become a dangerous assumption. Michael closed the folder. I have one question. Ronald looked at him. Do you want this to become a fight? No. Good. Because judges dislike emotional litigation. So do I. Michael smiled. I know. We'll comply with every disclosure requirement. No games. No delays. No hidden transfers. Ronald nodded. The trusts remain protected. They've been properly structured for years. No changes necessary. That answer mattered. Falcon Ridge Capital wasn't hidden. It was legally separated. Every structure had been reviewed repeatedly. Every filing completed correctly. Every investment documented. Preparation once again proved more valuable than improvisation. Meanwhile, Madison sat inside Richard Whitmore's executive office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Lake Michigan. Fresh flowers decorated the conference table. Awards covered one wall. Richard poured sparkling water into crystal glasses. You finally did it. Madison looked uncertain. I don't know why it feels so strange. 12 years is a long time. She stared through the glass toward the city below. I kept waiting for him to argue. Richard leaned comfortably against his desk, and he didn't. No begging. No. No anger. She slowly shook her head. He just accepted it. Richard laughed softly. That's because he knows. Knows what? That you've already moved on. Madison tried to smile, yet Ronald's reaction continued bothering her. She had expected resistance. Instead, she received silence. For reasons she couldn't explain, silence felt heavier. That evening, Richard invited her to dinner at Gibson's Steakhouse. Several executives joined them. Conversations revolved around expansion plans, private aviation, investment opportunities, vacation homes in Aspen. Madison listened while trying to participate naturally. Richard introduced her confidently. Our future vice president of marketing. Several executives congratulated her. One raised his glass. To new beginnings. Everyone smiled. Everyone except Madison. Somewhere in the middle of the conversation, she remembered Ronald replacing the broken kitchen cabinet the previous weekend without being asked. She pushed the thought away. Success required difficult choices, didn't it? Back in Naperville, Ronald entered the house shortly after 8. Madison hadn't returned. The rooms echoed with unfamiliar emptiness. He walked upstairs carrying 3 storage boxes. Inside his home office sat decades of organized records, tax returns, investment agreements, corporate filings, insurance documents, trust certificates. Every folder carried printed labels. Every document had both paper and encrypted digital copies. Ronald removed only what Michael requested. Nothing more, nothing less. Preparation reduced panic. He had learned that lesson from finance long before life demanded it personally. While organizing files, he paused at an old photograph. Their honeymoon in Carmel by the sea. Madison laughing on a windy beach. Neither of them wearing expensive clothes. Neither caring. He looked at the picture for only a few seconds before placing it inside another box labeled personal. Memory belonged there, not on his desk. His phone buzzed. Benjamin Hayes. You busy? A little. I've got news. Ronald closed the storage box. I'm listening. One of those pension funds we discussed yesterday officially hired an investment bank. For exploring strategic exits. Ronald remained quiet. Benjamin continued. They're considering selling nearly 1.3%. Ronald walked toward the living room window. When? Possibly within 3 weeks. Price expectations. Below market. That caught Ronald's attention. Institutional investors rarely sold below market unless they anticipated future weakness. Either confidence inside Apex was declining, or someone knew something. Benjamin lowered his voice. I think the market is starting to smell smoke. Ronald answered calmly. Smoke doesn't matter. Benjamin finished the thought. Until someone finds fire? The next morning, Ronald arrived at work carrying the same leather lunch bag, the same stainless steel travel mug, the same quiet expression. Nothing about him suggested his marriage had ended. Coworkers certainly didn't know, until lunchtime. Someone had seen Madison meeting with attorneys the previous afternoon. Rumors spread quickly. By 1 o'clock, nearly everyone in the department knew. Sympathetic glances followed Ronald through the hallway. Nobody approached him directly. People rarely knew what to say around quiet suffering. Near the elevator, 2 analysts whispered, "I heard she left him." For the CEO, "I don't know. I guess she wanted more." Ronald pressed the elevator button. He didn't react. The doors opened. The conversation ended. Silence often embarrassed gossip more effectively than confrontation. Later that afternoon, Madison appeared unexpectedly in Ronald's office. She closed the door behind her. Neither spoke immediately. The room felt unfamiliar despite years of working in the same building. "I wanted to tell you in person. I read the petition. I'm sorry." Ronald looked at her calmly. "I believe you are." She seemed relieved that he wasn't angry. "I don't want this to become ugly. It doesn't have to. We can divide everything fairly." "We will." Madison hesitated. "You're taking this better than I expected." Ronald answered honestly. Preparing for difficult things is easier than pretending they can't happen. She searched his face for resentment. Found none. For a brief moment she almost wished she had. Anger would have been easier to understand. She finally stood. "I'll have my attorney contact yours." "They already have." She nodded. Then quietly left. Ronald watched the office door close. Only after she disappeared did he open the encrypted laptop hidden beneath several financial reports. Falcon Ridge Capital. A notification flashed across the screen. Confidential acquisition opportunity, institutional block available. Estimated value $96,400,000. Ronald clicked Accept Review. A detailed ownership map appeared. The shares belonged to one of Apex Dynamics' oldest institutional investors. Exactly the kind Benjamin had mentioned. Ronald reached for his phone. "Benjamin, I'm here. Begin due diligence." "You want the full position?" Ronald looked through the office window toward the executive floor, where Richard Whitmore's corner office overlooked the skyline. His answer came without hesitation. "Every available share." The game Madison believed had already ended had only just begun. The purchase order reached Falcon Ridge Capital at exactly 8:12 Monday morning. Benjamin Hayes walked into Ronald Sanchez's office carrying a thin blue folder instead of the usual thick binders. That alone told Ronald the negotiations had gone well. Benjamin closed the door. They accepted. Ronald looked up from his monitor. Without a bidding war? They wanted certainty. Benjamin placed the purchase agreement on the desk. The pension fund approved the transaction late last night. Ronald opened the folder. 1.3% of Apex Dynamics. $96,400,000. Closing scheduled in 48 hours. He signed the authorization page without hesitation. No celebration, no dramatic speech, just another deliberate decision. Benjamin leaned back. "Do you realize what this means?" Ronald continued reading. "We're over 6%. Benjamin smiled. "The market will notice. Eventually." "No." Benjamin shook his head. "Immediately." Across the city, Richard Whitmore entered the executive conference room smiling. The quarterly board meeting had begun well. Sales exceeded projections. International expansion remained on schedule. Analysts continued issuing favorable ratings. Everything pointed upward, at least on the surface. Corporate Secretary Allison Reed quietly handed him a sealed envelope before the meeting officially started. "What's this?" "Shareholder disclosure." Richard opened it casually. Halfway through the first page, his expression changed almost imperceptibly. Falcon Ridge Capital. Beneficial ownership disclosure. Total ownership 6.11%. One board member looked over. Everything all right? Richard folded the document. Just a new institutional investor. Another director shrugged. That happens? Richard forced a smile. Yes, it does. But inside, one question refused to disappear. Who exactly was Falcon Ridge Capital? He had reviewed every major shareholder for years. BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, large pension systems, insurance companies. Falcon Ridge had never appeared on that list. Now it had crossed the reporting threshold almost overnight. Someone had been quietly accumulating shares for years, without attracting attention. Richard disliked surprises. Meanwhile, Ronald spent the morning exactly as usual. Risk reports, compliance meetings, cash flow analysis. No one looking at him would suspect he had just approved a transaction worth nearly $100 million. At lunch, he ate grilled chicken and vegetables. Across the cafeteria, co-workers discussed a breaking financial headline displayed on CNBC. Did you see this? A new activist investor. Falcon Ridge. I've never heard of them. Think they'll pressure Richard? No chance. Richard Whitmore had become something of a corporate celebrity. Most employees believed no investor would seriously challenge him. Ronald quietly finished his lunch. Someone nearby asked casually, "Ronald ever heard of Falcon Ridge?" He looked up. "I've read about them." "What do you think? They seem patient." That answer satisfied everyone. No one asked another question. At 3 o'clock, Ronald received a calendar invitation. Executive Financial Review. Attendance required. Location 38th floor. He entered the executive conference room 5 minutes early. Richard Whitmore sat at the head of the polished walnut table. Madison occupied a chair 2 seats away. Several vice presidents reviewed printed reports, while assistants prepared coffee. Richard greeted everyone warmly. When Ronald entered, Richard smiled politely. "Good afternoon, Ronald." "Good afternoon. Have a seat." Ronald chose the chair closest to the windows. For nearly an hour, the meeting focused on ordinary financial matters: operating margins, supply chain costs, raw material pricing, nothing unusual. Then Richard turned toward Ronald. "I'd like your opinion." Every head turned. Ronald waited. "Our risk department has been reviewing maintenance reserves." "Correct. Any concerns?" The room became unusually quiet. Ronald knew precisely what Richard referred to: the altered reserve calculations, the revised filings, the inconsistencies. He answered carefully. "My review isn't complete." Richard smiled. "But preliminary impressions?" "I don't offer conclusions before finishing evidence." Several executives nodded approvingly. A cautious analyst. Exactly what they expected. Richard maintained his pleasant expression. "Fair enough." The meeting moved on. Only Ronald noticed Richard watching him once more before looking away. After the meeting, Madison caught Ronald near the elevators. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course." They stepped into a quieter hallway. "I heard about Falcon Ridge." "So did everyone else." She smiled slightly. "Richard thinks they'll eventually request board seats." "Maybe." "What do you think?" Ronald looked toward the city skyline. "I think investors usually want value." "That's a very Ronald answer." She laughed softly. For a brief second, the conversation felt familiar, almost comfortable. Then her phone vibrated. "Richard." She answered immediately. "I'm coming." The warmth disappeared. "I have to go." "I know." She hesitated before leaving. "Take care of yourself." "You too." He watched her disappear around the corner. There had once been a time when she would have stayed. Now someone else occupied that priority. Ronald accepted the reality without resentment. Acceptance and surrender were different things. That evening, Benjamin arrived at Ronald's house carrying dinner from a small Italian restaurant in Oak Brook. Neither wanted to cook. They spread documents across the dining table, ownership maps, institutional investor profiles, board voting percentages. Benjamin tapped one chart. Another opportunity. Ronald examined it. A hedge fund controlled 2.4%. They're unhappy. Benjamin nodded. They expected faster growth. Would they sell? They'll listen. Ronald marked the name. What about financing? Benjamin opened another folder. We don't actually need outside financing anymore. Ronald looked up. Falcon Ridge had reached that point quietly. Years of disciplined investments had generated enormous liquidity. Buying Apex no longer required convincing banks, only choosing the right timing. Benjamin grinned. Feels different now, doesn't it? Ronald considered the question. No. No. It's still numbers. Benjamin laughed. You're impossible. No. Ronald smiled faintly. I'm consistent. Later that night, Ronald logged into Falcon Ridge's secure research platform. New reports had arrived from Harrison and Cole Forensic Accounting, only preliminary observations, nothing conclusive. Still, several entries caught his attention. Capitalized maintenance expenses, vendor payment timing, asset life assumptions, small irregularities, each individually explainable, collectively, less so. He highlighted every section requiring additional verification, never exaggerating, never assuming. Facts first, always. Tuesday morning brought unexpected news. Emily Parker appeared outside Apex headquarters carrying a camera crew. Chicago Business Review had published an online article. Who is Falcon Ridge Capital? The article revealed almost nothing. Only confirmed facts. Patient investing, long-term industrial acquisitions, exceptional annual returns, anonymous leadership, corporate governance reputation, no photographs, no executive interviews, no speculation. Richard read the article inside his office before his first meeting. He disliked one sentence more than all the others. Industry observers describe Falcon Ridge as unusually disciplined and rarely interested in short-term profits. That description sounded less like an investment fund and more like someone preparing for control. He immediately called General Counsel Daniel Brooks. I want everything. On Falcon Ridge? Everything. Who owns it? Who manages it? Who's financing it? Daniel nodded. We'll hire investigators. Richard looked once more at the article. I don't like invisible shareholders. Around noon, Ronald received another encrypted message from Benjamin. Only 6 words. They're finally looking for you. Ronald smiled, almost imperceptibly. He typed a single reply. Good. Let them keep looking. He closed the laptop and returned to reviewing manufacturing contracts as though nothing extraordinary had happened, because from his perspective, nothing had. He wasn't chasing Richard Whitmore. He wasn't chasing Madison. He wasn't chasing revenge. He was following a plan written years before either of them realized they were standing in its path. And somewhere inside Apex Dynamics, someone was becoming increasingly nervous about an investor whose face they still couldn't identify. The first serious crack appeared inside a vendor contract nobody expected Ronald Sanchez to read. It was buried in a routine payment review for Apex Dynamics' Cleveland manufacturing plant. 28 pages. Standard legal language, equipment maintenance, emergency repair services, annual value $18.7 million. The vendor was North Star Industrial Solutions, a privately held company based in Delaware. Nothing unusual appeared on the first page, or the second. The problem waited inside Appendix D. Ronald read the ownership disclosure twice. North Star's registered managing member was Lakefront Advisory Group. Lakefront's mailing address matched a private office suite on East Delaware Place in Chicago. Ronald entered the address into the internal vendor database. 3 other Apex contractors used the same suite. Different names, different services, same address. He placed his coffee beside the keyboard and opened the payment histories. Northstar Industrial Solutions, Brighton Logistics Partners, Midwest Equipment Consulting, Redwood Procurement Services. Over 4 years, Apex Dynamics had paid the 4 companies a combined $146 million. The payments had increased every quarter. Ronald checked the invoices. Many were vague. Operational consulting, emergency procurement support, specialized maintenance coordination. Descriptions broad enough to justify almost anything. He compared the dates against the maintenance reserve reductions. The pattern aligned almost perfectly. Expenses had not disappeared. They had been redirected. The only question was why. Ronald printed 7 pages and placed them inside a plain folder. No conclusions, no accusations, only facts. At 9:15 a.m., he called Benjamin Hayes. I found 4 related vendors. How related? Same business address? Different ownership layers? Payments? $146 million. Benjamin became quiet. That isn't smoke, not yet. What do you need? Corporate registration records, beneficial owners, banking relationships. I'll start now. Ronald ended the call and returned to his regular work before anyone noticed the interruption. By 10 o'clock, Apex headquarters had become restless. Emily Parker's second article had appeared online. This one carried a sharper headline. Questions surround Apex Dynamics. Vendor spending as mystery investor expands stake. The article did not accuse Richard Whitmore of wrongdoing. It did something more dangerous. It asked specific questions. Why had vendor expenses risen while maintenance reserves fell? Why had several large contracts received limited competitive bidding? Why had the board approved executive bonuses during the same period employees gathered around phones and computer screens? Financial analysts whispered in hallways. Managers closed office doors. Richard responded within 40 minutes. A company-wide email appeared at 10:42. Apex Dynamics maintains rigorous procurement standards and remains fully confident in its financial controls. Recent speculation is based on incomplete information and does not reflect the strength of our operations. Ronald read the message once. The language was polished. Careful. Empty. It answered none of Emily's questions. At 11, another message arrived. Mandatory department review. All internal financial requests involving historical vendor records now required executive approval. Ronald stared at the screen. That policy had never existed before. Someone was closing doors, which meant they had finally heard footsteps. At noon, Ronald carried his homemade lunch toward the cafeteria. The executive dining area was nearly empty. Richard had summoned senior officers to a private meeting upstairs. Madison was among them. Ronald sat near the window and opened his container of rice and grilled chicken. 2 tables away, junior accountants discussed the article. $146 million in related contracts. That number wasn't in the article. It's circulating internally. Do you think Falcon Ridge leaked it? Maybe they're planning a takeover. Ronald kept eating. Information moved quickly inside frightened companies, usually faster than management could control it. His phone vibrated beneath the table. Benjamin had sent a secure message. Northstar ownership chain identified. Call immediately. Ronald finished lunch before returning the call. Rushing would attract attention. At 12:24, he entered an unused conference room and locked the door. Benjamin answered. You were right about the vendors. Who owns them? That's where it gets interesting. Ronald waited. Northstar is controlled by Lakefront Advisory. Lakefront is controlled by a Nevada trust. The trustee is a private law firm in Wilmington. Beneficiary still protected. And the other companies? Same pattern. Different trusts. Same law firm. Ronald looked through the glass wall toward employees passing outside. Common Director 1. Name Charles Whitmore. Ronald's grip tightened slightly around the phone. Richard had an older brother, a former commercial real estate developer who rarely appeared in public company records. Confirmed corporate filing signatures and 2 bank documents. Send everything to Michael. Already done. Benjamin paused. Ronald, this is no longer an accounting irregularity. Ronald looked at the folder on the table. No, it's a governance problem, and potentially self-dealing. Potentially. Benjamin exhaled. You still refuse to say it before the evidence is complete? Yes. Ronald ended the call. He understood the significance. If Richard had approved contracts benefiting companies connected to his brother, the board should have received a conflict disclosure. Ronald had reviewed years of proxy statements. No such disclosure existed. That absence mattered more than any rumor. At 2 o'clock, Patricia Monroe arrived at headquarters. She was one of Apex's longest-serving independent directors. 59, former federal prosecutor, known for asking questions executives preferred to avoid. Ronald saw her enter Richard's office carrying a thick binder. The door closed. 40 minutes later, it opened again. Patricia walked out without shaking Richard's hand. Her expression revealed nothing. Richard's did. His smile had disappeared. 5 minutes later, Ronald received another meeting request. Executive review, immediate attendance. He entered the conference room to find Richard Madison, Chief Financial Officer Gregory Lane, and General Counsel Daniel Brooks already seated. A folder rested in front of Ronald's chair. Richard spoke first. Ronald, we understand you've been reviewing several historical vendor agreements. I have. Why they appeared during the maintenance reserve analysis. Gregory leaned forward. Those contracts have already been audited, internally. Yes, by whom? The CFO's jaw tightened. Richard intervened. This isn't an interrogation. Ronald met his gaze. No, it's a risk review. Madison sat silently beside Richard. She did not look at Ronald. Richard opened the folder. We need you to suspend the vendor analysis. On what basis? It falls outside your assigned scope. It directly affects reserve accuracy. That determination belongs to executive management. Ronald allowed a brief silence. Will the instruction be provided in writing? The room changed. A verbal order could disappear. A written one became evidence. Daniel Brooks shifted in his chair. Richard's expression remained controlled. If necessary. It is. Gregory looked irritated. You're being unnecessarily procedural. Ronald answered calmly. Procedures protect everyone. Richard studied him for several seconds. Perhaps for the first time he was no longer looking at a quiet employee. He was looking at a risk he could not easily measure. You'll receive written instructions, Richard said. Thank you. The meeting ended. Madison followed Ronald into the hallway. Why are you pushing him? I'm doing my job. You know what I mean. Ronald stopped beside the elevator. No, I don't. This article has everyone under pressure. I didn't write it. But you've been digging through the same records. I review risk. Madison lowered her voice. Richard believes someone inside the company is feeding information to Falcon Ridge. Ronald watched the elevator numbers descend. Does he have evidence? No? Then he has a suspicion. The doors opened. Ronald stepped inside. Madison remained in the hallway. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Ronald looked at her before the doors closed. No, Madison? Someone else did that years ago. That evening, Michael Donovan joined Ronald and Benjamin at Falcon Ridge's West Loop office. Corporate records covered the conference table. Michael pointed to 4 signatures connecting Charles Whitmore to the vendor entities. This establishes affiliation. Does it establish Richard's knowledge? Ronald asked. Not yet. Then we keep looking. Michael nodded. Harrison and Cole found something else. He opened a forensic report. 2 North Star invoices were approved personally by Richard. Benjamin leaned forward. For how much? $23 million. Ronald examined the approval codes. The evidence was becoming stronger, still incomplete. Michael continued. Independent Director Patricia Monroe contacted outside counsel this afternoon about the vendors. She requested an emergency governance review. Ronald looked toward the ownership chart displayed on the wall. Falcon Ridge now controlled more than 6%. Not enough to command the board, enough to demand answers. His phone rang. An unfamiliar number. He answered. "Ronald Sanchez." A woman's voice responded. "This is Eleanor Carter, chairwoman of Apex Dynamics." Ronald straightened slightly. "How can I help you? I've reviewed your internal reports." Ronald said nothing. Eleanor continued. "The board is meeting tomorrow morning." "What kind of meeting?" Her answer arrived without hesitation. "An emergency one." The line went silent for a moment. Then she added the sentence Richard Whitmore had spent years ensuring no one would say. "And this time he won't control the agenda." The emergency board meeting began at 7:30 the next morning. Ronald Sanchez was not invited. That did not surprise him. He arrived at Apex Dynamics at his usual time, parked his Honda on level 4, and carried the same worn leather bag through the lobby. The atmosphere had changed overnight. Security officers stood beside the executive elevators. Assistants hurried between conference rooms carrying sealed folders. Senior managers spoke in low voices and stopped whenever someone unfamiliar approached. Ronald passed through it all without slowing down. Fear made organizations noisy. Evidence made Ronald quieter. At 8:05, he entered his office and found a written instruction waiting in his inbox. Effective immediately, all historical vendor analysis must be suspended pending executive review. The message came from Chief Financial Officer Gregory Lane. Richard Whitmore was copied. So was General Counsel Daniel Brooks. Ronald printed the email. He placed it inside the same folder containing the vendor contracts. Then he opened his regular workload and continued reviewing quarterly risk reports. He had asked for the order in writing. They had provided it. That decision would matter later. At 8:47, Eleanor Carter entered the executive boardroom and locked the door behind her. 9 directors sat around the long walnut table. Richard occupied his usual seat near the center. Patricia Monroe sat opposite him, with 3 binders arranged neatly in front of her. The company's general counsel remained near the wall. An outside attorney had joined by secure video. No assistants were permitted inside. Eleanor began without ceremony. "This meeting concerns possible undisclosed related party transactions." Richard leaned back. "I object to that characterization." Patricia opened the first binder. "Then let the documents correct us." The first records showed 4 Apex vendors sharing the same business address. The second showed overlapping ownership structures. The third connected those structures to Charles Whitmore, Richard's older brother. Several directors looked toward Richard. He did not move. "These are independent businesses," he said. Patricia turned another page. 2 received contracts without competitive bidding. That happens during urgent operational needs. You personally approved $23 million in invoices. As CEO, I approve large expenditures. Did you disclose your brother's involvement? Richard's expression hardened. I was not aware of his involvement. The room went still. That answer created a new question. If Richard truly did not know the company had severe control failures, if he did know he had misled the board, neither possibility protected him. Eleanor folded her hands. "We are authorizing an independent investigation." Richard looked directly at her. "On whose recommendation? Mine." And based on what source? Patricia answered. "Internal risk reports." For the first time that morning, Richard's confidence slipped, only slightly. But everyone saw it. At 9:20, Ronald received a message from Michael Donovan. The board approved independent review. Preserve everything. Ronald deleted nothing, changed nothing, moved nothing. Preservation mattered more than discovery once litigation became possible. 10 minutes later, Madison entered his office. She closed the door. "You knew about the meeting. I knew there would be one. How Eleanor called me." Madison stared at him. "The chairwoman called you personally?" "Yes." Why? Ronald looked toward the folder beside his keyboard. Because I documented the inconsistencies. Madison lowered her voice. Richard says this is being exaggerated, then the review will confirm that. He thinks Patricia is trying to remove him. That is his interpretation. And Falcon Ridge. What about them? He thinks they're coordinating with someone inside the company. Ronald's expression remained neutral. Does he have evidence? You always say that. Because it matters. Madison walked closer to the desk. This company is under attack. Ronald shook his head once. Questions are not attacks. They can destroy reputations, only when the answers are worse. She stepped back, as though the sentence had struck her. For several seconds, she searched his face. Something about him felt unfamiliar, not colder, larger, more certain. She had spent years believing Ronald avoided conflict because he lacked strength. Now she wondered whether he simply chose his moments carefully. Her phone rang. Richard. She rejected the call. That surprised both of them. I need to ask you something, she said. Ronald waited. Are you helping Falcon Ridge? He did not answer immediately. A truthful answer required precision. I have followed every legal and professional obligation. That isn't what I asked. It is the answer I can give. Madison's eyes narrowed. You're hiding something. Ronald looked at her calmly. We all choose what we reveal. She understood the reference, the late dinners, the gifts, the conversations with Richard. Her face tightened. This isn't about us. No, it stopped being about us when you filed the petition. Madison looked away. For once she had no defense prepared. She left without another word. At noon, Michael Donovan arrived at the DuPage County Family Court carrying 2 document cases. The divorce settlement conference had been scheduled weeks earlier. Madison's attorney expected a short meeting. The marital home was worth approximately $740,000. Retirement accounts totaled less than $500,000. Joint savings amounted to $186,000. Ronald's visible salary was comfortable but ordinary. From Madison's perspective, the numbers were simple. She asked to keep her BMW personal investments and executive compensation. Ronald could keep the Honda his retirement account and half the home equity. Her attorney, Rebecca Lowe, presented the proposal confidently. We believe this division is fair and efficient. Michael read the summary, then looked at Ronald. Ronald nodded. Michael placed a sealed disclosure packet on the table. There is one additional matter. Rebecca glanced at the packet. What is that Mr. Sanchez's separate property disclosure? Madison looked toward Ronald. Separate property, Michael continued. The assets predate certain marital claims and are held through legally structured trusts and investment entities. Rebecca's confidence faded. How significant are these assets? Michael did not answer directly. The complete valuation is contained in the sealed filing submitted to the court. Madison reached toward the packet. Rebecca stopped her. Let me review it first. The room fell silent as she opened the documents. Her eyes moved across the first page, then the second. By the third, her expression had changed entirely. Falcon Ridge Capital appeared nowhere in the public heading. Instead, the filing listed several trusts: Sierra North Holdings, Ridge Strategic Partners, Sanchez Family Investment Trust, combined estimated value more than $1.8 billion. Madison stared at the number, then looked at Ronald. That can't be right. Ronald said nothing. Rebecca read further. The holdings had been established before the most recent years of the marriage. Many were protected by agreements Madison had signed without reading closely. Years earlier, she had considered them routine investment paperwork. Now every forgotten signature returned with weight. You're a billionaire? She asked. Ronald's answer remained quiet. Asset values change. That isn't an answer. It is the accurate one. Madison pushed back from the table. For 12 years, she had believed she understood her husband's life, his salary, His car, his habits, his limits. Now a sealed legal disclosure suggested she had never known the size of the world he had built. Rebecca regained her composure. We need additional time. Michael nodded. That is reasonable. Madison looked from the papers to Ronald. Why didn't you tell me I did? No, you didn't. I told you I was building private investment partnerships. You never said this. You never asked. The sentence carried no anger. That made it worse. Madison remembered every time she had dismissed his late-night research. Every time she had laughed about his old car. Every time she had compared him to Richard. She had mistaken silence for emptiness. Privacy for failure. Patience for weakness. The conference ended without settlement. Outside the courthouse, Madison stood alone on the stone steps as Ronald and Michael walked toward the parking garage. Her phone rang again. Richard. This time she answered. His voice came quickly. The board has hired outside investigators. Madison barely heard him. Her eyes remained fixed on Ronald's Honda as it exited the garage. Richard continued. I need to know who gave them those records. Madison looked down at the sealed disclosure still trembling slightly in her hand. For the first time, she considered a possibility that seemed impossible only an hour earlier. The quiet man driving away might not simply know Falcon Ridge, he might be Falcon Ridge. By Friday morning, Apex Dynamics had become 2 companies. The first still existed in public. Its website displayed smiling employees, modern factories, and Richard Whitmore speaking beneath the words, building America's future. Its stock continued trading. Its sales teams continued making calls. Its factories continued producing components. The second company existed behind closed doors. That company ran on subpoenas, preservation notices outside counsel, and frightened executives. Ronald Sanchez understood the difference better than most. Public confidence moved quickly. Internal truth moved slowly. But truth rarely stopped once the process began. At 8:10 a.m., a formal document preservation notice reached every senior officer and financial department. No emails could be deleted, no invoices destroyed, no vendor files altered, no personal devices containing company business could be wiped. The notice came from Morrison Hale, the independent law firm hired by the board. Richard Whitmore's name did not appear on it. Eleanor Carter's did. That detail spread through headquarters within minutes. The board had taken control of the investigation. At 8:30, Ronald received a private call from Patricia Monroe. We need your original analysis. It has been preserved. Not the summary. The source files. Yes. Who will receive them? Outside counsel only. Ronald looked through his office glass wall. 2 executives stood near the elevator speaking with company security. I'll provide a clean chain of custody. Patricia paused. You've done this before. I've reviewed distressed companies. That isn't what I meant. Ronald said nothing. Patricia continued. You knew exactly how these documents would be challenged. Evidence without procedure becomes argument. Agreed. She gave him the secure transfer instructions. Before ending the call, she added one question. Mr. Sanchez is Falcon Ridge, planning to increase its position. Ronald's expression remained still. That is not something I can discuss in my role as an employee. Patricia noticed the precision. So you won't deny a connection. I won't make an improper statement. The line went quiet. Then Patricia gave a soft, humorless laugh. I'm beginning to understand why Richard underestimated you. Ronald ended the call and prepared the files. Every original contract received an index number. Every email included metadata. Every spreadsheet carried a verified timestamp. He documented when each file had been accessed and where it had been stored. No shortcuts, no dramatic discoveries. Only a trail that another professional could follow without trusting him personally. That was the difference between proof and persuasion. At 10:00, Richard convened an executive meeting. Ronald was not included. Madison was. She entered the 38th floor conference room with 8 senior officers, and found Richard standing beside the windows. His suit remained perfect. His voice did not. "We are dealing with an organized attempt to destabilize this company." No one responded. Chief Financial Officer Gregory Lane stared at the table. General Counsel Daniel Brooks reviewed a legal pad without writing anything. Richard continued. "Falcon Ridge is exploiting routine accounting questions to create panic." One vice president cleared his throat. "Do we know that Falcon Ridge provided the information? We know they benefit from it. That isn't the same thing." Richard looked toward him sharply. The vice president lowered his eyes. Madison watched the exchange. A month earlier, Richard's certainty had seemed powerful. Now it looked defensive. He turned toward her. "Marketing needs to prepare a full confidence campaign. What kind employee messaging? Investor materials? Community engagement? Before the investigation is complete, the investigation is a distraction." Madison hesitated. "If we make strong claims now and the findings contradict them..." Richard stepped closer. "The findings will not contradict them. How do you know?" The room froze. Madison had never questioned him so directly. Richard's face changed. "Not much. Enough. Because I know this company." Madison thought about the sealed divorce disclosure, Ronald's investments, his careful answers, his years of silence. Richard knew Apex publicly. Ronald seemed to know it underneath. That distinction was becoming impossible to ignore. At noon, Falcon Ridge submitted an amended ownership filing. The position had increased again. 8.74%. Financial news channels interrupted regular programming. Apex Dynamics shares rose briefly on takeover speculation, then fell when analysts discussed the board investigation. By 12:20, the stock had moved more than 11% in both directions. Employees gathered beneath the lobby screens. Someone read the filing aloud. Falcon Ridge says it may seek discussions regarding governance board composition, strategic alternatives, and shareholder value. Another employee whispered, "That sounds like a takeover." Ronald passed behind them carrying his lunch. Nobody looked at him. His phone vibrated. "Benjamin? 2 more funds called. Selling one is willing to sell. The other wants to vote with us. At what price? Reasonable. Define reasonable." Benjamin gave the figures. Ronald mentally calculated the premium. Accept the voting agreement. And the shares. Not yet. Why wait? The board investigation needs independence. Benjamin understood. If we buy too aggressively, Richard claims the investigation is investor-controlled. Exactly. You're giving them room. I'm giving the process credibility. Falcon Ridge could have moved faster. Ronald refused. Control gained through pressure might win a vote. Control gained through facts would survive one. That afternoon, outside, investigators began interviews. Procurement officers entered conference rooms carrying laptops. Plant managers joined encrypted video calls. Accounting staff provided passwords to archived systems. At 3:40, investigators asked Ronald to appear. 2 attorneys and a forensic accountant waited inside. The lead attorney introduced herself as Laura Mitchell. "This interview is being conducted on behalf of the independent directors. I understand. You are not personally represented by us." "I understand." She placed a recorder on the table. "When did you first identify concerns involving maintenance reserves?" Ronald gave the exact date. "What did you do next?" He described the review. No exaggeration, no theory, only sequence. Laura showed him an internal email. "Did you receive this instruction to suspend analysis?" "Yes." "Did anyone explain why no?" "Did Richard Whitmore speak to you directly?" "Yes." "What did he say?" Ronald repeated the conversation almost word for word. The forensic accountant leaned forward. "You have an unusually strong memory. I took notes immediately afterward." "Why?" "Because the instruction involved a material risk review." Laura opened another document. "Did you provide information to journalist Emily Parker?" "Did you provide information to Falcon Ridge Capital?" Ronald paused. The question had arrived exactly as Michael Donovan predicted. I have not unlawfully disclosed confidential Apex information to any outside party. Laura studied him. That was carefully phrased. It was accurately phrased. Are you affiliated with Falcon Ridge? Ronald looked directly at her. My counsel will address any ownership or affiliation questions through the appropriate legal channel. The room became silent. The investigators did not push further. They had received enough to understand the issue was larger than an employee interview. At 5:15, Ronald returned to his office. A company-wide announcement appeared 5 minutes later. The board had established a special committee of independent directors. Patricia Monroe would lead it. Richard would have no authority over the investigation. Gregory Lane would take temporary leave. All related vendor payments were suspended. The market closed with Apex shares down 14%. At 6:00, Richard remained alone in his office. Most executives had left. Madison stood near the door. He poured himself a drink. You should go home. So should you. He laughed once. Home is where people go when they aren't fighting for something. Madison looked at him carefully. Did you know about Charles Richard stopped pouring? My brother has many investments. That wasn't my question. He set down the bottle. You're letting Ronald get inside your head. Madison felt a cold realization. She had not mentioned Ronald. Richard had. Why would Ronald matter? Richard turned toward the window. He doesn't. The answer came too quickly. Madison left without saying goodbye. Across town, Ronald entered Falcon Ridge's conference room. Benjamin and Michael were waiting. A new ownership map covered the wall. Falcon Ridge controlled 8.74%. Friendly institutions controlled another 7.2%. Several undecided shareholders had requested meetings. Benjamin pointed toward the combined total. We're approaching effective influence, not control. Not yet. Michael placed a legal notice on the table. The board has announced a special shareholder meeting. Ronald read the date. 21 days away. Agenda board composition. Governance reforms. Strategic alternatives. Benjamin smiled. This is the opening. Ronald looked at the list of shareholders. No? What is it? The test? Michael handed him one final envelope. Inside was a formal request from Eleanor Carter. Falcon Ridge Capital was invited to present its plans directly to the board. For the first time, the company was no longer asking who the invisible investor was. It was demanding that the investor step forward. Ronald closed the envelope. Benjamin watched him carefully. You can't stay hidden after this. Ronald looked through the dark windows toward downtown Chicago. I know. 21 days remained before the shareholder meeting. 21 days before Richard Whitmore learned who had been buying his company. And 21 days before Madison discovered that her quiet husband had never been standing beneath the CEO. He had been preparing to replace him. Ronald Sanchez accepted the board's invitation at 6:14 the next morning. His reply contained 3 sentences. Falcon Ridge Capital would attend. Its presentation would address governance capital, allocation operational stability, and long-term shareholder value. The firm's principal representative would appear in person. No name was provided. Benjamin Hayes read the response twice before sending it. They're going to assume I'm presenting. That's useful. For how long until the meeting begins? Benjamin leaned against the conference table. Richard will have investigators watching every entrance. He already does. You're still going to work, yes. You're presenting Falcon Ridge's plan to the Apex board tonight, at 7. And you're spending the day inside Apex as a risk analyst. Ronald closed the final presentation folder. My employment responsibilities remain unchanged. Benjamin laughed once. Sometimes I can't tell whether you're disciplined or completely unreasonable. They often look similar from a distance. Ronald put on his charcoal jacket, picked up his worn leather bag, and left Falcon Ridge's West Loop office before sunrise. At 7:45, he parked on level 4. A black sedan sat 2 rows away. The driver appeared to be reading a newspaper. He never turned a page. Ronald noticed him without looking directly. Richard's investigators had finally connected Ronald to something important. They simply did not know what. Ronald entered the building. The receptionist greeted him as usual. Several employees discussed the upcoming shareholder meeting near the lobby screens. A financial network displayed photographs of Eleanor Carter, Patricia Monroe, and Richard Whitmore. Falcon Ridge's logo appeared beside a dark silhouette. The caption read, "Mystery Investor Prepares Board Presentation." Ronald walked past the screen and entered the elevator. Nobody connected the silhouette to the man standing beside them. At 8:20, Richard received a confidential report from the private investigators. Falcon Ridge had no publicly listed chief executive. Benjamin Hayes appeared in several old investment filings, but only as an authorized representative. Michael Donovan acted as outside counsel. The firm's ultimate controlling person remained protected through private entities and lawful disclosure exemptions. There was one new detail. Ronald Sanchez had visited the same West Loop building multiple times. Richard stared at the surveillance photographs. Ronald entering the garage. Ronald leaving after midnight. Ronald meeting Benjamin near a private elevator. The investigator across the desk spoke carefully. "We can confirm repeated contact. Employment not officially. Ownership unconfirmed. Then what can you confirm that Mr. Sanchez has a relationship with Falcon Ridge?" Richard looked again at Ronald's photograph. The ordinary suit, the old car, the quiet expression. For years, Richard had barely considered him worth remembering. Now Ronald's face appeared in the center of an investigation involving billions of dollars. Keep following him. The investigator hesitated. "We should discuss legal boundaries. Follow him in public." "We are. I want to know where he goes tonight." The investigator closed the folder. "We'll report what we can lawfully obtain." Richard disliked the answer. People had started placing limits around him. First the board, then counsel, now hired investigators. Control was leaving one boundary at a time. At 10:30, Madison asked Ronald to meet in an empty conference room. She was already waiting when he entered. On the table lay a printed photograph from a business publication. It showed Benjamin Hayes entering Falcon Ridge's office. "You know him," she said. "Yes." "How well?" "Well enough." "Is he your partner?" Ronald closed the door. "In some investments." Madison's voice became quieter. "And Falcon Ridge, what are you asking? Are you the person behind it?" Ronald looked at her for several seconds. Their marriage had lasted 12 years. During that time, he had explained his plans more than once. Small manufacturers, distressed assets, private partnerships, patient capital. Madison had heard the words. She had simply never considered them important. "The board presentation is tonight," he said. "That doesn't answer me. You'll have your answer soon." Madison stepped closer. "Why not tell me now?" "Because confidential obligations do not disappear because our relationship changed. I was your wife. You still are, legally. That isn't what I meant." Ronald's expression remained calm. "No, it isn't." She looked down at the photograph. "I thought you were afraid to take risks. I avoided careless risks. I thought you had no ambition. You measured ambition by visibility. I thought Richard was building something larger than you." Ronald did not respond. There was nothing he could say that reality had not already begun saying for him. Madison's eyes filled with frustration. "Were you testing me? No. Then why live like that? Like what? Driving that car? Packing lunch? Letting people underestimate you?" Ronald answered without anger. "The car works. That can't be your explanation. It is part of it. And the rest, I never believed wealth needed to perform for strangers." The sentence left Madison silent. She had spent years entering expensive rooms to feel successful. Ronald had spent those same years quietly buying the buildings beneath them. At noon, the special committee released preliminary findings. The announcement was brief. Investigators had identified undisclosed relationships between certain Apex vendors and members of Richard Whitmore's family. The committee was reviewing approximately $146 million in payments. Richard denied wrongdoing. Trading in Apex shares was temporarily halted. The news spread across the company like an electrical surge. Employees stopped working. Phones rang without pause. Reporters gathered outside the building. By 12:30, camera crews blocked the main entrance. Richard issued another statement. He called the contracts legitimate. He called the investigation incomplete. He called the timing suspicious. He did not explain the missing disclosures. At 2:00, Eleanor placed Richard on administrative leave. The decision was temporary. Its meaning was not. Security disabled his unrestricted executive access. His company devices were collected. His authority over senior officers was suspended. For the first time in 11 years, Richard Whitmore left Apex headquarters without controlling what happened after he walked out. Reporters surrounded him outside. "Did you direct contracts to your brother? Are federal regulators involved? Is Falcon Ridge seeking your removal?" Richard ignored every question. Madison watched from the lobby. He entered a black SUV and disappeared into traffic. She expected to feel sympathy. Instead, she felt uncertainty. Richard had always looked strongest when a room belonged to him. Outside that room, he seemed smaller. At 5:30, Ronald shut down his Apex computer. He placed the original vendor folder inside a locked cabinet. Then he took the elevator to the garage. The black sedan followed him toward the West Loop. Ronald did not attempt to lose it. There was no reason. At 6:35, he entered Falcon Ridge Capital through the private garage. Benjamin waited upstairs with Michael Donovan and a communications advisor. A Navy suit hung inside Ronald's office. Handmade, perfectly fitted, expensive without appearing decorative. Ronald changed slowly. He replaced his steel wristwatch with a simple black one. No luxury brand visible. No unnecessary display. Benjamin handed him the presentation binder. Every major financial network is outside Apex. They won't be inside the boardroom. Not tonight. Michael reviewed the legal protocol. The board knows Falcon Ridge's controlling principal will attend. Only Eleanor and Patricia have received the sealed identity notice. "Richard still believes I may be the principal," Benjamin said. Ronald adjusted his cuffs. "Let him." At 6:58, a secure elevator opened onto the executive floor of Apex Dynamics. Eleanor Carter waited beside the boardroom doors. Patricia Monroe stood with her. Both greeted Ronald formally. "Mr. Sanchez," Eleanor said. "Madam Chair." Behind the doors, 7 directors waited. So did Daniel Brooks, outside counsel, and 3 advisors. Benjamin entered first. Several directors straightened, expecting him to take the central seat. He did not. Benjamin moved to the side. Michael followed. Then Ronald entered, carrying the Falcon Ridge presentation. Silence spread across the room. One director looked from Ronald to Benjamin. Another removed his glasses. Daniel Brooks stopped writing. Eleanor walked to the head of the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, Falcon Ridge Capital has designated its founder and controlling principal to present tonight." She turned toward Ronald. "Mr. Sanchez, the floor is yours." Ronald placed the binder beside the empty chairman's seat. At that exact moment, the boardroom doors opened again. Madison stood outside with a communications folder pressed against her chest. She had been summoned to advise on employee messaging. Her eyes found Ronald. Then the Falcon Ridge documents. Then the chairman's seat beneath his hand. Every remaining doubt disappeared. Ronald looked across the board table. His voice remained calm. For 6 years, Falcon Ridge has studied this company. He opened the first page. For 3 years, we have been preparing to save it. Madison stood frozen in the doorway, and Ronald advanced to the next slide. The title contained only 5 words: Apex Dynamics, the plan, After Richard Ronald Sanchez did not begin with Richard Whitmore's misconduct, he began with the factories. The first slide showed Apex Dynamics' 12 major manufacturing facilities across Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. Each location appeared beside 3 numbers: average equipment age, deferred maintenance requirement, employee count. The boardroom remained silent. Ronald advanced to the next slide. Apex needed $312 million in critical equipment investment over the next 30 months. Without it, 3 plants faced serious production interruptions. 2 major customer contracts could be lost. Nearly 2,800 jobs would become vulnerable. One director leaned forward. Management never presented numbers this high. Ronald looked toward him. Management changed the assumptions. He displayed the original maintenance projections beside the revised versions. The difference was not subtle. Expected repair costs had been reduced, useful equipment life had been extended, emergency expenses had been capitalized, reserve requirements had been lowered, the company had not become more efficient, its reports had become more convenient. Patricia Monroe turned several pages in her copy. These figures match the independent accountant's preliminary findings. They should, Ronald said. We used the same source records. Another director studied him carefully. How did Falcon Ridge gain access to internal information? Michael Donovan answered before Ronald could. Falcon Ridge's analysis relies on public filings, legally obtained corporate records, shareholder materials, and information properly disclosed through the board's investigation. The director looked toward Ronald. And his employment, Ronald answered directly. My responsibilities as a risk analyst required me to identify material financial concerns. Did you use confidential information to purchase shares? No. Can you prove that? Yes. Michael placed a legal memorandum on the table. Every Falcon Ridge purchase had been reviewed against Ronald's internal access dates. Trading windows had been controlled. Transactions involving potentially material non-public information had been paused or cleared through independent counsel. The records covered 6 years. No improvisation, no convenient explanations prepared after the fact. The structure had existed from the beginning. Eleanor Carter looked toward the directors. Outside counsel reviewed these procedures before tonight's meeting, and one asked. Daniel Brooks answered reluctantly. We found no evidence of improper trading. Madison remained near the doorway. She barely moved. The Ronald standing before the board was not pretending to be someone else. That realization hurt more than the disclosure of his wealth. He had always been this man, measured, prepared, exact. She had simply refused to look closely enough. Ronald advanced the presentation. The next section addressed capital allocation. Falcon Ridge proposed suspending all executive bonuses for 18 months. The savings would not transform the company, but the decision would signal a change in priorities. Next came the corporate aircraft. 2 leased Gulfstream jets. Annual, cost $14.6 million. Falcon Ridge proposed terminating 1 lease immediately and selling unnecessary aviation rights connected to the second. Then came outside consultants, public relations advisors, strategy firms, executive coaching contracts, political consultants, luxury conference expenses. Combined annual spending exceeded $61 million. Ronald did not call the spending corrupt. He called it undisciplined. The word landed harder. One director frowned. You expect the company to cut its way back to growth. No matter how Ronald changed slides. A 5-year investment plan appeared. New robotic assembly systems, employee retraining, plant modernization, supplier renegotiation, regional production expansion, debt reduction. Falcon Ridge was prepared to commit $450 million in new capital if the board approved governance reforms and an operational restructuring. The directors exchanged glances. Benjamin Hayes spoke for the first time. The capital is fully committed. No financing contingency. None. No outside lender approval, none. Falcon Ridge did not need permission from banks. That changed the discussion. Apex had spent years presenting investors with ambitious plans funded by future borrowing. Ronald presented money already available. One director asked the obvious question: what does Falcon Ridge want in return? 3 board seats, Ronald said. Control of the Special Operational Committee. Appointment of an independent interim chief executive. And removal of executives involved in undisclosed related party transactions. The room became still again. Eleanor folded her hands. Does that include Richard? Yes. No hesitation, no pleasure. Only an answer. Madison watched Ronald's face. She had imagined this moment differently after learning the truth. She expected revenge, a visible satisfaction, some sign that he had built Falcon Ridge to humiliate the man she had chosen over him. But Ronald spoke about Richard as though discussing a damaged asset. Serious, necessary, impersonal. That frightened her more. Patricia turned toward the final section. Who do you propose as interim CEO, not me? Several directors looked surprised. Ronald continued. Falcon Ridge invests in companies. It does not require its founder to operate them personally. You already understand Apex better than most executives, Eleanor said. Understanding a business does not automatically make someone the best daily operator. Then who Ronald displayed the name. Karen Mitchell, 52. Former Chief Operating Officer of North American Industrial Systems. 27 years in advanced manufacturing. Experience restructuring 3 publicly traded companies without mass layoffs. No relationship to Falcon Ridge, no relationship to Apex. Patricia reviewed the biography. She's available. She has agreed to serve if the independent directors request it. You already spoke with her 6 months ago. Madison looked down. 6 months earlier, she had complained that Ronald lacked direction. At the same time, he had been interviewing possible leaders for a company he did not yet control. The presentation ended after 73 minutes. Ronald closed the binder. I'm not asking this board to trust me because I own shares. He looked around the table. I am asking you to examine the plan. If the numbers are wrong, reject it. If the governance structure is weak, challenge it. If another investor offers a better path, consider it. But do not preserve failed leadership because admitting failure feels expensive. No one spoke. Richard had built loyalty through confidence. Ronald created authority by inviting examination. Eleanor called a 15-minute recess. The directors left in small groups. Madison remained near the windows while Ronald organized the presentation materials. When they were finally alone, she approached him. So it's true. Ronald did not pretend to misunderstand. Yes. You founded Falcon Ridge? Yes. You control almost 9% of Apex. Through affiliated entities, yes. You're worth more than $1 billion. On paper. Madison stared at him. You went to work every day while owning all of that. I had work to do. Her voice tightened. You let me believe you were ordinary. I am ordinary. No, Ronald. She shook her head. You knew what I meant. He placed the final document into his leather case. I knew what you valued. The sentence silenced her. Madison looked toward the boardroom doors. Did you buy Apex because of Richard? No. Because of me? No. Then why? Because the company was valuable, badly governed, and fixable. Nothing in his answer belonged to her. That was the part she could not accept. You really don't care what happened between us? Ronald looked at her. For the first time that evening, something personal entered his expression. Not anger. Grief that had already finished becoming distance. I cared for 12 years. Madison's eyes lowered. Before she could answer, Eleanor returned. The board is ready. The directors resumed their seats. A formal vote began. First, to accept Falcon Ridge's capital proposal for final negotiation. 7 votes in favor. 2 opposed. Second, to nominate 3 new independent directors supported by Falcon Ridge. 6 votes in favor, 3 opposed. Third, to recommend Richard Whitmore's permanent removal subject to the special committee's completed findings. 5 votes in favor, 4 opposed. The motion passed. Madison closed her eyes. Richard's future had narrowed to a single investigation. Ronald remained motionless. Then Patricia received a secure message from outside counsel. She read it once. Her expression changed. "What is it?" Eleanor asked. Patricia placed the phone on the table. Investigators recovered deleted emails from Richard's personal account. Daniel Brooks stood. What emails? Patricia looked directly at Ronald. Messages discussing payments to Charles Whitmore. The room went silent. "There's more," she said. One message instructs Gregory Lane to reduce the maintenance reserves before the refinancing. Ronald slowly closed his pen. The missing link had finally appeared. Richard had not merely known, he had directed it. And this time the evidence carried his own words. Richard Whitmore learned about the recovered emails from a television screen. He was sitting inside his attorney's conference room when a financial news anchor announced that Apex Dynamics investigators had found messages connecting him directly to vendor payments and altered maintenance reserves. The television displayed his official company portrait. Confident smile, perfect suit. The image belonged to a different man now. Richard's attorney, Samuel Price, muted the television. "How many personal accounts did you use for company business?" Richard remained standing near the windows. 1. Were messages deleted? I regularly cleared old emails. That is not what I asked. Richard turned. I don't remember. Samuel opened a folder. You need to start remembering. Richard's face hardened. I hired you to defend me, and I cannot defend an answer that changes every hour. The attorney placed a printed email on the table. Richard recognized it immediately. The message had been sent to Gregory Lane 32 months earlier. Adjust the reserve assumptions before the refinancing presentation. We cannot carry that number into the board meeting. Another email followed. Charles needs the North Star payments approved this week. Keep the vendor review limited to operational staff. Richard looked away. Samuel watched him carefully. Did your brother receive money from these companies? I don't know his personal finances. Did you know he controlled North Star? He advised them. That is not the same answer. Richard walked towards the conference table. My brother introduced reliable contractors during a difficult expansion, and you failed to disclose the relationship. It was not material. $146 million is material. Richard slammed one hand against the table. I saved Apex. Samuel did not react. You may have saved it once. He pointed toward the emails. These could destroy it now. At Apex headquarters, the special committee remained in session long after midnight. Outside counsel projected recovered messages across the boardroom screen. Some were short. Some appeared harmless alone. Together, they formed a clear sequence. Richard pressured Gregory Lane to reduce maintenance reserves before debt negotiations. Gregory instructed accounting employees to reclassify emergency repairs. Vendor contracts connected to Charles Whitmore received accelerated approval. Executive bonuses increased after the refinancing closed. The company had borrowed money using financial assumptions Richard helped manipulate. Patricia Monroe read each message without visible emotion. Eleanor Carter sat at the head of the table. What is the potential exposure? Laura Mitchell answered. Shareholder litigation is likely. Regulatory investigation almost certain. Criminal. We cannot determine that. The directors understood what she meant. The evidence would be referred to federal authorities. Whether charges followed no longer belonged to the board. Ronald sat beside Michael Donovan at the far end of the room. He had no desire to speak unless asked. The company now needed independent judgment more than investor pressure. One director turned toward him. Does Falcon Ridge still intend to provide $450 million? Yes. Even after this, the operational value remains. The stock may collapse when trading resumes. Price and value are not the same. What if regulators impose penalties? We modeled that. The director stared at him. You modeled executive fraud. We modeled severe governance failure. Ronald's voice remained calm. Falcon Ridge never depended on Richard's reputation. That truth separated him from almost every other investor. Most shareholders had purchased Apex because they trusted Richard. Ronald had purchased it because he trusted the factories, employees' customer contracts, and industrial assets beneath Richard's image. A polished executive could disappear. A well-positioned manufacturing network remained valuable. Eleanor called for another vote. The motion was simple. Terminate Richard Whitmore for cause. All 9 directors voted. 8 supported termination. 1 abstained, none opposed. Richard's 11-year leadership ended at 12:43 a.m. No farewell statement. No retirement package. No executive celebration. His company access was permanently revoked. His deferred compensation was frozen pending legal review. Apex would also seek recovery of bonuses tied to inaccurate financial reports. Eleanor signed the resolution. Then she looked toward Ronald. Karen Mitchell can begin Monday, yes. Will Falcon Ridge announce its support publicly, yes. Will you appear beside her? Ronald considered the question. My presence may reassure investors. It will also attract attention. I understand. Madison stood outside the boardroom with the communications team when the decision became official. Her responsibility was to prepare the employee announcement. For years, she had written messages celebrating Richard's leadership. Now she was expected to explain his removal. She stared at the blank screen. Apex Dynamics today announced the termination of Chief Executive Officer Richard Whitmore following preliminary findings by the special committee. The sentence felt unreal. 3 weeks earlier, Richard had promised to make her vice president of marketing. He had spoken about their future as though success had already been guaranteed. Now his name had become a corporate liability. Her phone vibrated. Richard. Madison let it ring twice before answering. Did they fire me? His voice lacked its familiar confidence. Yes. Who voted, I don't know. You were there. Outside the room. Ronald was inside. Yes. Richard became silent. Then his voice sharpened. He planned this. The emails were yours. You don't understand how corporations operate. I understand what the messages said. They were taken out of context. Did you know Charles controlled the vendors? Richard did not answer. That silence gave Madison more truth than another denial. You knew, she said. I knew he had relationships. You told the board you didn't. I was protecting the company. No. Madison closed her eyes. You were protecting yourself. Richard laughed bitterly. And now you believe Ronald is some kind of hero. This isn't about Ronald. It has always been about him. Madison looked through the glass wall toward the closed boardroom doors. No, Richard. Her voice became quieter. That is what you never understood. She ended the call. For the first time, she had chosen not to follow him. By 7 the next morning, Apex issued 3 announcements. Richard Whitmore had been terminated for cause. Karen Mitchell had been appointed interim CEO. Falcon Ridge Capital had committed up to $450 million to support modernization and financial stability. The 4th announcement appeared in Falcon Ridge's regulatory filing. Ronald Sanchez was formally identified as its founder, controlling principal and chief investment officer. His photograph spread across financial networks within minutes, not a corporate portrait. A recent image showed him leaving Apex headquarters carrying his worn leather bag. The headline appeared beneath it. Quiet Apex employee, revealed as billionaire investor behind historic takeover. Employees stared at the lobby screens. Co-workers from Risk Analysis gathered in disbelief. One analyst whispered, "He ate lunch with us yesterday." Another said he drove that old Honda every day. A third remembered every joke about Ronald lacking ambition. Nobody laughed now. Ronald arrived at 8:03. Cameras crowded the entrance. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Sanchez, when did you decide to remove Richard Whitmore? Are you taking control of Apex? How much is Falcon Ridge worth? Did your divorce influence the investment?" Ronald stopped only once. "This company employs more than 18,000 people," he said. "Today should be about protecting their future." Then he entered the building. The lobby became silent. Employees moved aside as he crossed the marble floor. Some looked impressed, others embarrassed. Most simply watched. Ronald pressed the elevator button. Madison approached before the doors opened. "You could have entered through the private garage." "Yes. Why didn't you?" "Because I have never been ashamed of walking through this lobby." The doors opened. She stepped inside beside him. Neither spoke as the elevator climbed. At the 23rd floor, Ronald prepared to exit. Madison touched his arm. "I'm sorry." He looked toward her hand. She released him. "For Richard," he asked. "For not seeing you." Ronald held her gaze. "You saw me." The answer was quiet. You simply believed what you saw wasn't enough. He stepped out. The doors closed between them. Madison stood alone as the elevator continued toward the executive floor. At 9:00, federal agents entered Apex headquarters carrying document requests. At 9:05, trading resumed. The stock fell 18%. Then Falcon Ridge announced its full capital commitment. By noon, the shares had recovered almost half the loss. Richard watched the price movement from his attorney's office. His phone rang. This time the caller was not a reporter. It was the United States Attorney's Office, and they wanted him to appear for an interview. Richard Whitmore entered the United States Attorney's Office through a private underground entrance. His attorneys had requested discretion. Federal prosecutors offered procedure instead. Security officers collected his phone. A receptionist recorded his arrival. 2 agents escorted him into a windowless interview room containing a rectangular table, 4 chairs, and a digital recorder. Nothing in the room cared who he had been. No corporate portraits, no executive assistants, no employees waiting for instructions. Only questions. Samuel Price sat beside him. Across the table were Assistant United States Attorney Helen Walsh and Special Agent Marcus Bell. Helen opened a folder. "This is a voluntary interview." Richard adjusted his cuffs. "I understand. You may leave at any time." "I understand. Lying to federal investigators may constitute a separate offense." Samuel placed one hand near Richard's legal pad. "My client understands." The recorder began. Helen started with North Star Industrial Solutions. Richard described it as a legitimate vendor introduced through industry contacts. Then she asked about Charles Whitmore. Richard called his brother an informal advisor. Marcus placed corporate records on the table. The documents identified Charles as a director, authorized signatory and beneficiary of entities receiving Apex payments. Richard studied the signatures. "I was not involved in those structures." Helen slid forward the recovered email. "Charles needs the North Star payments approved this week." Richard's own words sat between them. He looked toward Samuel. His attorney gave no visible reaction. Helen waited. Richard finally answered. "My brother told me delays were threatening production. Why did you instruct staff to limit the vendor review? I wanted operations moving. Why not disclose your brother's financial interest? I did not know its full extent. Did you know he would benefit?" Richard paused. The answer took too long. "Yes." The single word changed the room. Marcus wrote something. Helen continued. "How much did you receive?" "Nothing. Directly, nothing. Indirectly, no." Helen opened another file. A property company controlled by Charles had purchased a condominium in Aspen. Richard had used it 17 times over 4 years. Private aviation records showed Apex aircraft transporting him there. The property's operating expenses had been paid by one of the vendor entities. Richard leaned back. That was a family property. "Did you pay rent? No. Did you disclose the benefit? No." Samuel requested a break. The interview had lasted only 38 minutes. Outside the room, he closed the door and looked directly at Richard. "You told me there were no personal benefits. It wasn't mine. You used it. My brother owned it. A company funded by Apex vendors paid for it." Richard lowered his voice. "I never received cash. That distinction will not save you." Richard turned away. For years, people had accepted his explanations because refusing them carried consequences. Federal prosecutors had no reason to protect his confidence. Samuel continued, "If there is anything else, tell me now." Richard stared at the blank hallway wall. "There may be stock transactions." Samuel became still. "What stock transactions Charles bought Apex options before the refinancing announcement? Based on information from you, I don't know. Did you discuss the refinancing?" "He was my brother. That is not an answer." Richard said nothing. Samuel closed his eyes briefly. The interview did not resume that morning. At Apex Dynamics, Karen Mitchell began her first day as interim CEO at 6:30 a.m. She did not enter through the executive lobby. She drove directly to the Joliet manufacturing facility. Ronald met her beside the main production floor. Karen wore steel-toed boots, safety glasses, and a navy work jacket with no executive title printed beneath her name. Machines moved behind them. Metal components passed through automated cutting lines. Supervisors watched from marked safety zones. The plant employed more than 1,300 people. Karen shook Ronald's hand. "You were right about the vibration levels on Line 4. You inspected it before sunrise. What did maintenance say the primary bearing may fail within 6 weeks?" Ronald nodded. The previous reserve model assumed the line could operate another 18 months without major repair. Karen looked through the protective glass. Replacing it now costs $4.2 million. And waiting, possibly $27 million in production losses. That is why the reserve existed. Karen turned toward him. "Richard's team delayed the replacement twice." "I know. I approved it this morning. No committee presentation, no public announcement. A necessary decision based on evidence." Ronald had selected Karen because she understood that operational leadership rarely looked glamorous. It looked like replacing a bearing before it broke. They spent 3 hours walking through the plant. Workers expected speeches. Karen asked questions instead. How often did parts arrive late? Which machines required manual corrections? Why had overtime increased? Which safety reports remained unresolved? She wrote every answer herself. Ronald observed quietly. By 10 o'clock, the plant manager understood that prepared talking points would not protect weak operations. At headquarters, Madison faced a different kind of pressure. Reporters had discovered the divorce filing. Headlines connected her to Ronald and Richard. Some called her the marketing executive caught between a fallen CEO and a billionaire investor. Others described her as the wife who left before discovering her husband's fortune. The articles simplified 12 years into humiliation. Employees stopped speaking when she passed. Messages filled her social media accounts. Some mocked her, some insulted her, some asked for interviews. Madison deleted the applications from her phone. Then she entered a communications meeting and reviewed the company's employee statement. A senior manager suggested emphasizing Falcon Ridge's investment. Madison shook her head. Employees need operational facts. What facts? Plant funding, payroll stability, customer commitments. The billionaire story is driving public interest. This company is not a story about Ronald's money. The room became quiet. 3 weeks earlier, she might have used his wealth as the center of a campaign. Now she understood what he had tried to say. Visibility was not value. At noon, she sent Ronald a message. "Could we speak after work?" He replied 12 minutes later. 30 minutes. Public place. No warmth, no hostility, only boundaries. They met at a quiet cafe near the Chicago River. Ronald arrived carrying a folder from the Joliet plant. Madison had already ordered coffee. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then she placed a signed document on the table. I'm withdrawing my claim for an accelerated settlement. Ronald read the first page. Why, because I entered it without understanding the facts. Your attorney advised this. Yes. And you agree yes. Ronald closed the document. Madison looked toward the river. I also told Richard I won't speak with him again. That is your decision. I thought you should know. You don't owe me that information. Her face tightened. I owe you more than information. Ronald waited. I was wrong about you. You were wrong about what mattered to you. Madison accepted the correction. I kept measuring our life against other people. Yes. I thought you were standing still. I know. I thought Richard was moving forward. He was moving quickly. She looked at him. That isn't the same thing. No. Madison's voice softened. Is there any chance for us? The question remained between them. Ronald did not answer immediately. Outside, pedestrians crossed the bridge beneath a cold afternoon sky. 12 years could not be dismissed with one sentence. Neither could it be restored with regret. Finally, Ronald spoke. I forgive you. Hope appeared in Madison's eyes. Then he continued, but forgiveness is not reconciliation. The hope faded. I don't understand. Yes, you do. He placed the signed document back on the table. You regret the result. That isn't fair. It may not be. His tone remained calm. But I cannot build a future by pretending the choice never happened. Madison lowered her eyes. Ronald stood. I hope you build a good life. Without you, that is what you chose. He left the cafe carrying the plant folder. Madison remained beside the untouched coffee. That evening, Benjamin called Ronald from Falcon Ridge. We received the preliminary shareholder count. How close with current commitments we control or influence 29%. And Richard's supporters 24. Undecided enough to decide everything. The shareholder meeting was 8 days away. Then Benjamin added another development. Someone approached 3 institutions with a competing proposal, who a private consortium organized this morning. Backed by Richard, we don't know yet. Ronald looked across the quiet Falcon Ridge office. Richard had lost his title. He had lost the board. He had not lost every ally. Benjamin sent the proposal. Ronald opened the first page. The consortium offered to purchase Apex, remove Falcon Ridge's nominees, and restore the previous expansion strategy. At the bottom appeared the name of its financial advisor, Charles Whitmore. Richard's brother was no longer hiding behind vendors. He was preparing to fight for the entire company. Charles Whitmore's proposal reached every major Apex shareholder before sunrise. The document looked professional. 38 pages, confidential financing letters, projected returns, a 5-year expansion model, a promise to protect management continuity and restore market confidence. The proposed purchase price valued Apex Dynamics at $74 per share, almost 20% above the previous closing price. By 8 o'clock, financial networks were calling it a serious competing bid. By 8:15, Apex shares rose 12%. By 8:30, Benjamin Hayes had identified the weakness. He placed the proposal in front of Ronald Sanchez inside Falcon Ridge's conference room. The financing isn't committed. Ronald turned to the lender letters. 2 private credit funds had expressed interest. Neither had guaranteed funds. Both required satisfactory due diligence. Both could withdraw if regulators expanded the investigation. The offer appeared large. Its foundation remained uncertain. Michael Donovan sat beside Benjamin. There's another issue. He opened the ownership section. The consortium includes 3 investment vehicles incorporated within the last 72 hours. Beneficial owners. Ronald asked. Not fully disclosed. Charles. He is listed as advisor, not principal. Ronald read the documents in silence. Richard and Charles had spent years using distance as protection. Advisors, trusts, private companies, layered ownership. The structure changed names. The habit did not. Benjamin pointed toward the offer price. Shareholders may ignore the risks. They may. $74 is difficult to compete with. We don't need to compete with a number they cannot fund, but we need to prove that. Ronald closed the proposal. No. Benjamin frowned. No, they need to prove they can fund it. Falcon Ridge would not attack the offer emotionally. It would ask questions. Which banks had committed capital? Who controlled the new entities? Would the buyers assume regulatory liabilities? Would they protect the $450 million modernization program? Would they preserve employee pensions? Would they retain Karen Mitchell? Would they waive conditions tied to the federal investigation? If Charles could answer, shareholders deserved to consider his proposal. If he could not, the offer would collapse under its own weight. At Apex headquarters, Karen Mitchell called an emergency leadership meeting. She placed both proposals on the table. Charles promised a premium purchase price. Falcon Ridge promised operating capital. The difference mattered. One plan rewarded shareholders immediately. The other attempted to rebuild the company. Karen looked toward the senior officers. Our job is not to campaign for either side. Madison sat near the end of the table. What do we tell employees the truth? That ownership may change. Yes. That the competing offer could replace the current plan, yes. Several executives appeared uncomfortable. Richard's administration had treated communication as control. Karen treated it as responsibility. She continued. Factories will continue operating. Payroll will continue. Customer orders will be fulfilled. No employee should hear otherwise from this team. The plant modernization program had already begun. Emergency repairs at Joliet were scheduled. Equipment inspections had started in Cleveland and Fort Wayne. Karen would not allow a shareholder fight to stop operational work. After the meeting, Madison remained behind. Charles's proposal mentions restoring the previous expansion strategy. Karen looked up. I saw that. That strategy was built on the reserve assumptions under investigation. Yes. So the offer depends on continuing a plan that may have been false. Karen studied Madison carefully. You understand the company better than your title suggests. Madison gave a small, tired smile. I spent years explaining other people's plans. Perhaps you should begin evaluating them. The comment stayed with her. At 10 o'clock, Falcon Ridge released a formal shareholder response. It did not increase its price. It did not call Charles dishonest. It requested verifiable evidence of financing and complete beneficial ownership disclosure. The response contained 9 questions. Financial analysts began discussing them immediately. By noon, Charles's proposed lenders had issued statements. Neither confirmed a binding commitment. Apex shares surrendered half their morning gains. At 1:20, Emily Parker published another investigation. The article identified one of the consortium's new entities as sharing legal counsel with Northstar Industrial Solutions. A second entity had received initial funding from a real estate company connected to Charles. The competing offer was not independent. It was another Whitmore structure. Charles appeared on television 40 minutes later. He sat inside a hotel conference room beside 2 attorneys. His expression resembled Richard's, confident, controlled, practiced. This proposal offers shareholders immediate value, he said. Falcon Ridge is attempting to seize a valuable American manufacturer at a depressed price. A reporter asked about Northstar. Charles dismissed the question. Northstar provided legitimate services. Did you profit from Apex contracts? My investments are private. Did your brother approve those contracts? Richard acted in the company's best interests. Are your financing commitments binding? Charles looked toward his attorney. We have strong institutional support. It was not an answer. Markets noticed. So did shareholders. That afternoon, Ronald attended a meeting with 6 institutional investors. No cameras, no public statements, only portfolio managers and governance officers seated around a conference table. One manager spoke first. Charles is offering more money. He is offering a higher number, Ronald said. You don't believe it will close. I have not seen evidence that it can. What if he produces financing? Then you should evaluate it. The manager appeared surprised. You would tell shareholders to consider a competing offer. I would tell them to consider facts. Another investor leaned forward. What does Falcon Ridge gain if its nominees win influence over the restructuring? Financially, the same thing every shareholder gains if Apex recovers. No control premium, no. No management fees paid by Apex, no. No special dividend, no. The investors exchanged glances. Richard had trained markets to expect hidden incentives. Ronald presented alignment instead. A pension representative asked the most difficult question. Will you promise no plant closures? Ronald answered carefully. I will not promise what the evidence may not support. The room tightened. Then he continued. I will promise no closure will be used to create a temporary stock increase. Every facility will be reviewed on operations, customer demand, capital needs, and community impact. If a plant can be repaired, we repair it. If workers can be retrained, we retrain them. If leadership failed before employees did leadership changes first. The pension representative wrote down the sentence. By the end of the meeting, 4 institutions indicated support for Falcon Ridge. 2 remained undecided. The shareholder count moved. 36% for Falcon Ridge's nominees, 27% for the Whitmore Consortium. The rest had not committed. 5 days remained. That evening, Madison returned to the Naperville house to collect the last of her belongings. Ronald was in the home office reviewing shareholder reports. She stood at the doorway. Charles's offer is failing. It is weakening. Do you ever celebrate sometimes? When the work is finished? Madison entered slowly. The room looked almost unchanged. Financial books, labeled folders. The old photograph box remained on the lower shelf. She placed her house key on the desk. My attorney sent the revised settlement. Michael received it. I'm not asking for any Falcon Ridge assets. They were not marital property. I know. She looked around the office. I used to think this room was where you hid from life. Ronald closed the report. It was where I built one. Madison accepted the sentence. I have been offered another position. We're a manufacturing technology company in Minneapolis. Will you take it, I think so? Ronald nodded. It sounds like a clean start. She waited for something more. He offered nothing false. No invitation, no emotional rescue. Madison picked up the final box beside the door. I hope Apex wins. So do I. She left the house without looking back. Ronald remained at the desk until her car disappeared from the driveway. Then Benjamin called. We found the consortium's primary money source, who a foreign industrial group operating through a Canadian subsidiary. Condition they want Apex's defense components division sold to them after closing. Ronald stood. That division supplied specialized parts for United States military contractors. Any transfer would face national security review. Charles's financing was not merely uncertain. It depended on a transaction regulators might block. Do we have documents? Ronald asked. An executed side letter. Verified. Michael confirmed the signatures. Ronald looked at the shareholder meeting schedule. 5 days. Charles had offered investors a premium without revealing the asset sale required to finance it. Another hidden condition. Another incomplete truth. Benjamin lowered his voice. There's one more signature on the side letter. Who's Richard Whitmore? Ronald said nothing. Richard had joined the consortium while under federal investigation. He was not only fighting to regain Apex, he was preparing to sell one of its most sensitive divisions to finance his return. The final shareholder meeting began at 9 o'clock on a gray Thursday morning. Apex Dynamics rented the largest ballroom at the Chicago Lakeshore Convention Center. More than 700 shareholders, employees, reporters, and advisors filled the room. Security officers stood beside every entrance. Television cameras faced the raised stage. 3 long tables waited beneath the Apex logo. The first belonged to the current board. The second belonged to Falcon Ridge Capital. The third had been reserved for the Whitmore Consortium. Charles Whitmore arrived at 8:36, wearing a dark navy suit and an expression built for cameras. 2 attorneys walked beside him. Richard did not appear. His criminal attorney had advised him to avoid public statements. The empty seat beside Charles attracted more attention than his arrival. Ronald Sanchez entered through the main doors 6 minutes later. Benjamin Hayes and Michael Donovan followed. Reporters called his name. Ronald did not stop. He wore a charcoal suit, white shirt, and plain black tie. No visible luxury, no performance. Employees watched him cross the ballroom. Many had known him as the quiet analyst from the 23rd floor. Now institutional investors stood when he approached. Ronald greeted the board, placed his folder on the Falcon Ridge table, and sat down. At exactly 9, Eleanor Carter opened the meeting. She explained the voting procedure. Shareholders would decide whether to retain the existing directors, elect Falcon Ridge's 3 nominees, and authorize the board to continue negotiations regarding Falcon Ridge's capital plan. The Whitmore Consortium had also submitted a non-binding acquisition proposal. Charles received 20 minutes to present first. He walked to the podium with practiced confidence. Apex shareholders deserve value, he began. He described Falcon Ridge as an opportunistic investor, exploiting temporary weakness. He promised a higher purchase price. He promised strategic expansion. He promised continuity for customers and employees. He did not mention the Defense Division sale. He did not mention the Foreign Industrial Group. He did not mention that his financing depended on regulatory approval that might never come. When he finished, several shareholders applauded. The $74 offer remained attractive. Eleanor thanked him. Then she turned toward Ronald. Falcon Ridge may respond. Ronald walked to the podium carrying one thin folder. He did not display charts. He did not repeat the entire restructuring plan. He began with a question. Mr. Whitmore, is your offer fully financed? Charles leaned toward his microphone. We have substantial institutional support. That was not the question. Charles's attorneys shifted in their seats. Ronald continued. Are the funds committed without conditions? Charles looked toward Eleanor. This is not a courtroom. No, Ronald said. It is a shareholder meeting, and shareholders are being asked to trust your number. The room became quiet. Ronald opened the folder. Your financing requires the sale of Apex's Advanced Defense Components division within 90 days of closing. Charles's face changed, only slightly. Enough for the cameras. Ronald held up the verified side letter. The proposed buyer is a foreign industrial group operating through a Canadian subsidiary. Voices moved through the ballroom. Charles stood. That document is confidential. You are not denying it. Our transaction advisors are evaluating multiple strategic alternatives. Ronald looked toward the shareholders. The Defense Division generated $186 million in operating profit last year. It holds contracts involving controlled technology. Any transfer may require national security review. Without the sale, the consortium's financing falls short by approximately $1.1 billion. The ballroom erupted. Reporters raised their phones. Investors turned toward advisors. Charles's attorneys whispered urgently. Ronald placed the document before Eleanor. There is another issue. He displayed the signature page. Charles Whitmore, 2 consortium representatives, and Richard Whitmore. The former CEO had signed the side letter after the board placed him on administrative leave. He had attempted to arrange the sale of a major Apex division without authority. Charles approached the podium. My brother signed as an advisor. Your brother was under investigation for concealing related party transactions, Ronald replied. And you concealed his role in this proposal? Eleanor called for order. The ballroom slowly quieted. Charles returned to his table. His confidence had not disappeared. It had lost its audience. Ronald closed the folder. Falcon Ridge is not offering shareholders the highest imaginary price. We are offering committed capital, no hidden asset sale, no financing dependent on undisclosed conditions, no return to the leadership that created this crisis. He looked toward the employees seated near the center of the ballroom. Apex does not need another promise designed for a presentation. It needs machines repaired, debt reduced, contracts protected, managers held accountable, and employees treated as the source of the company's value rather than the cost of someone else's ambition. This time, the applause began among factory workers. Then engineers joined. Then several institutional representatives. Ronald stepped away from the podium before it became celebration. The votes were counted for almost 2 hours. During that time, Charles remained at his table. His attorneys made repeated calls. One proposed lender publicly withdrew support. The second announced that its financing discussions had ended. By noon, the Whitmore offer no longer existed in practical terms. At 12:18, Eleanor received the certified results. Falcon Ridge's 3 nominees had won with 58% of shares voted. The governance reforms passed with 63%. The board received authority to finalize Falcon Ridge's $450 million capital commitment. Charles Whitmore's proposal received less than 24% support. Ronald did not smile when the result was announced. He shook Benjamin's hand. Then Michael's. The victory did not feel like conquest. It felt like responsibility arriving. 3 months later, the Joliet production line operated with a new bearing system. 6 months later, Apex had reduced consultant spending by $41 million. 1 year later, the company completed modernization projects at 5 plants. No factories closed. More than 2,000 employees entered paid technical training programs. Debt fell. Customer delays declined. Safety performance improved. Karen Mitchell became permanent CEO. Ronald accepted the role of non-executive chairman. He never moved into Richard's old office. The space became a shared operational review room where plant managers presented problems directly to the board. Richard Whitmore eventually pleaded guilty to conspiracy securities fraud and making false statements to investigators. Gregory Lane cooperated with prosecutors. Charles faced civil claims and a separate investigation involving the vendor companies. Their names disappeared from Apex headquarters. Not erased, recorded accurately. Madison moved to Minneapolis and became vice president of communications for a manufacturing technology company. She stopped chasing proximity to powerful people. For the first time, she built authority that belonged to her. The divorce became final without public conflict. She and Ronald spoke only once afterward. She called to congratulate him on Apex's first profitable year after the restructuring. "I saw the earnings report," she said. "The factories are doing well." "They are. You did what you said you would. We had good people." Madison paused. "I hope you're happy." Ronald looked through the boardroom windows toward the Chicago River. "I'm at peace." It was not the answer she wanted. It was the truth. After the call, Ronald placed his phone beside a stack of plant investment proposals. His old Honda remained in the garage below. His lunch waited inside the small refrigerator near his office. Outside, employees crossed the lobby beneath a new company statement, built through discipline, sustained through trust. Years earlier, Madison had chosen the man who looked powerful. Richard had owned the room. Ronald had understood the building. In the end, one lost everything protecting an image. The other gained control without ever needing to announce his strength. Ronald opened the next proposal. A factory in Pennsylvania needed new equipment. 400 jobs depended on the decision. He picked up his pen. There was still work to do. The deepest lesson from Ronald's journey is that true strength does not always announce itself. Sometimes it looks like patience, discipline, quiet sacrifice, and the courage to keep building when no one believes in you. People may judge your worth by your clothes, your car, your title, or how loudly you speak, but none of those things define your real value. What matters is the character you protect when no one is watching, the work you continue when no one is applauding, and the truth you refuse to compromise, even when dishonesty seems more rewarding. Ronald also reminds us that forgiveness does not mean returning to the place that broke us. We can release anger without reopening the same door. We can wish someone well while still choosing peace, dignity, and a new beginning. Not every loss is meant to be reversed. Some losses teach us who we are, what we deserve, and what we must never abandon again. So never mistake silence for weakness, simplicity for failure, or patience for a lack of ambition. Your season of being underestimated may be the very season in which you are becoming unstoppable. What lesson from Ronald's story touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional stories filled with powerful life lessons, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next unforgettable journey.